we'll go ahead and get started because we have a quorum. I believe Director Green is in the building. Is Director Hollins, does anyone know, on his way?
I thought he was going to join virtually.
He's joining virtually. Okay, so this board meeting of the Board of Education for April 5th, 2022 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted on the PPS website under the Boards and Meetings tab. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight we have a very full agenda, and this includes receiving a staff report on how our students performed on the mid-year MAP assessments. This is an important indicator for us as we monitor progress towards accomplishing our board goals and our particular focus on the achievement of our Black and Brown students. The board will now vote on the consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you'd like to pull for discussion, we will set those aside for discussion and vote at the end of our meeting.
Chair, to pass, I'd like Resolution 6473 to be considered at the end.
6473.
What is it? And I just wanted to add, I don't want to pull it, but I want to direct my colleagues' attention. I just forwarded an email to all of you that I received from Dan Young and Terry Brady about the Western Bus contract. So I had asked a question about whether those were fuel-efficient vehicles, electric, and they are propane. So I wanted to make sure that that new expenditure was in alignment with our recently passed climate response policy. And the answer is yes.
Fantastic. So I saw that. That's fantastic. That's exactly in alignment with what, how we want to show up as a district in terms of our fuel use. Pardon me?
I said yay staff.
Yay staff. Comment from the peanut gallery. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No.
And so we've pulled Resolution 6473 to discuss at the end of our meeting. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on Resolutions 6467 and 6472 through 6474, but not 6473. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. And are there any abstentions? And do we have Director Hollins available or on the line?
We do not. Chair to pass, did we have a motion for that?
We did not have a motion. Thank you.
That's because I wasn't here. Because had I been here, you would have
we have
got
a
a
motion?
motion. So now that I'm here, I'll give you a motion.
Okay. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
Yes, you do. I make a motion.
Green and Scott. And we'll go ahead and we've already done a vote. That's 6-0 with student representative voting.
Yes.
And we did
So
it.
we must vote again.
Okay.
We need to vote again.
Okay. So we have Director Green moved, Director Scott seconded. We'll now vote on Resolution 6467 and 6472 through 6474 minus 6473. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Still yes.
Yes. And
Yes.
all opposed, please indicate by saying no. And are there any abstentions? And then student representative.
Yes.
Okay, the consent agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0. We're going to turn now to student and public comment. Before we begin, I'd like to review the guidelines for public comment. First, the board thanks you for taking the time to show up tonight to attend this meeting and provide your comments. Public input informs and improves our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, your reflections, and your concerns. Our responsibility as a board to actively listen, and to that end, I'd ask each of us to give our full attention to the people in front of us tonight. Our board office may follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony, and we request that complaints about individual employees please be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you'd like to provide to the board or the superintendent, we ask you mail them to public comment, all one word, at pps.net, public comment at pps.net. Make sure when you begin your comment you clearly state your name, and please spell your last name. And you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll hear a beep or a sound after those 3 minutes, which means it's time to conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment?
Yes. We'll start with Brian Porter, Emma Letner, and Lily Pallandry. They're going to share their spot.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Emma Leitner, spelled Leitner.
And I'm Bryn Porter, spelled Porter.
We're a pair of fifth graders from Lewis Elementary, and we're here to tell you about our idea to change the name of our school, which is Meriwether Lewis Elementary. And we've been working with our friend Lily. To start, we want to acknowledge that we're on land that was stolen from Native people, who may have been the ancestors of people in this room. We want to change our school's name because Meriwether Lewis was one of the leaders on an expedition that had an enslaved person and an unpaid Native American guide. That expedition led to white settlers taking land from Native people. This matters to us because we think our school's name should be respectful to all students, especially due to Oregon's racist history. We believe our school building should not be named after a white settler because the name of a school should represent the whole community. We want to change the name of our school to John R. Lewis Elementary. Students have given us input that they want to keep calling the school Lewis, so we tried to work with that request.
We want to change the name to John R. Lewis Elementary because he was a black civil rights leader and congressman. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and was one of the Big Six civil rights leaders. John R. Lewis died in 2020, and he did so much to help the civil rights movement, and we think that he is a good person to name our school after. We believe naming our school after a black leader helps to undo some of the white supremacy actions that have named our school buildings after mostly white people. We value community input, so we did a number of things to involve the community. First, we created a petition so the community could share their thoughts on the name change. We also presented to the PTA and the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, better known as the JEDI Committee, at our school. We sent out our petition to the school and local community. The data from our petition shows very strong support for changing the name of our school. In total, we had 376 individual responses and 94% support changing the name of the school, with 92% supporting changing the name to John R. Lewis Elementary. We are now waiting for a process from the district in order to move forward. We are aware that the board and district have multiple priorities right now, and we would like to remind you that confronting white supremacy through the act of renaming school buildings is still important to students in the district. As John R. Lewis himself said, never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you for listening and for your time. Do you have any questions for us?
I do have a question, and it's if you've heard of York, who was also on the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Yes, we have.
Thank you.
We have Oliver Bullman. Is Oliver Bullman here? Okay, we have Anissa Ali, Sophia Tobian, and Nura Salah.
Welcome.
Do we state our names first?
Yes, if you could say your first name and spell your last name, please.
Anissa Ali, Ali.
Nura Salah, Salah.
Sophia Tubian, Toobian.
Good evening, PPS School Board. Thank you for having us, and thank you to our peers and family members that came with us today. I'm Anissa Ali, a senior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School. I plan to attend Oregon State University next year, majoring in bioengineering. But today, I'm here as a representative of the No Place for Hate peer facilitation program at our school to advocate that the Muslim holiday Eid and the Jewish holiday Yom Kippur be recognized and considered as holidays in PPS, with the goal that both holidays be taken off district-wide in the upcoming school years. We live in a society where people come from different backgrounds and cherish different values, but at the end of the day, our differences are merely surface level. It is important that we celebrate and uplift one another. When people feel seen, heard, and valued in their community, the community thrives. Social movements throughout history and now are made from people from any lifestyle who simply understand the importance of standing together. You and I may celebrate different holidays, but all holidays are about spending time with family and enjoying the joyful holiday. Unfortunately, this is difficult for students, especially Muslim and Jewish students whose holidays are most often during school. Our parents have to call in for an excused absence, and we miss a full day of school that affects our learning. We spent our joyful holidays worrying about whether we can retake a test rather than enjoying time with our families. The sad thing is that over the winter breaks, we see people comfortably enjoying their holidays without the worry that it may affect their education. It has been a relevant topic among my peers, especially during our No Place for Hate peer facilitation training last winter. We were discussing how institutions and the way they function isn't as equitable as they should be, which affects people to this day. Times change, and with it, we should change too. Another topic my peers and I discussed is that no one really knows nor cares why we miss school on our holidays. We know why and how people celebrate holidays like Christmas, and we respect them, but when it comes to our holidays, we don't get the same treatment. This has a lot to do with the fact that it has not been recognized in our society. But society is too big to deal with, and everything takes one step at a time. So we need to begin with our institutions. We need to acknowledge that people celebrate different holidays and that their day should be just as valued as other popular holidays in the US. It is important that we as a community come together to support everyone. That's why my peers and I have taken responsibility upon ourselves for coming here and asking that Eid and Yom Kippur be official holidays that everyone in the district will take off. There are school districts across the country that have recognized either Eid or Yom Kippur as holidays, and on those holidays, the day is taken off by everybody. Not only will it allow for Muslim and Jewish students to enjoy their sacred holidays with ease, but allow our community to prosper by valuing our differences. As a senior, I know I won't be able to see this happen just yet, but I'm here today because I believe that it will one day. The first step starts here. I will now hand it up to my peers. They will go further in depth about the perspectives and their own personal stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, PPS School Board. My name is Sophia Tubian, and I'm a junior at Ida B. Wells High School. I am here on behalf of the Jewish community to convince you about readjusting future calendars for the school year to meet the needs of the Jewish students by giving Yom Kippur its day off to accommodate its importance. For those who don't know, Yom Kippur is considered the holiest holiday for Judaism. It is a day of repentance, a chance to look back on your past year and reflect on how it went, as well as any sins you may have committed, ask for forgiveness, and make right of your wrongs. On Yom Kippur, we are required to fast for 25 hours, from sunset the day before to sunset the day of. This gives us a chance to only focus on our thoughts and feelings and spend time with our family and loved ones. I could go on and on about the traditions and stories behind this, but I think it's important to bring awareness of what it's like as a Jewish student to celebrate this holiday while still having to attend school. I've always been the type of girl who strives in extracurriculars, especially in sports. Soccer has always been such a big part of my life, and I'm very thankful to get to play at my school and do what I love, while still being able to make time for my other activities. Usually, my soccer season falls around the same time as Yom Kippur. Throughout all my years playing high school soccer, it always happens to be on the day of a game, which usually means that my time and my chance to participate in activities doesn't work for me.
In my freshman year, I had to play a full game and then was only left with 45 minutes to eat and drink as much as I could before starting my fast. This happens to athletes all over who have to deal with this struggle, and it's a shame because some students may feel the pressure to play even due to these circumstances. In that same year, I was forced to go to school due to my workload in a specific class, and even missing one class could be crucial and I could fall behind. This day was no different. I remember having the worst stomach ache and my head was pounding, and yet it only got worse as time went on. It got to the point I had to be picked up because of how little energy I had, and due to such a struggle, I was having to focus in class. Because of this, I had missed a very important assignment in order to not compromise my health and well-being. I remember going into the building the following day to explain to my teacher the reason for my absence, and yet they wouldn't allow me to make up the assignment because it was only during that period that I could work on it. This was enraging for me, and I know I couldn't be the only student who has had this happen to them, so this is why I'm here in front of you today. I want to ensure on the fact that voices are heard from students and staff who participate in practices of Judaism. As Anissa mentioned before, our school is a multicultural environment, and it's important that all students and their religions are treated equally. Students shouldn't have to feel obligated to pick between either school or their practices because our school district doesn't take non-Christian faiths into account while making the calendar. Thank you for your time today. This is a topic that is important to us, being students of religious minority, and we hope bringing this light to the topic will help in future decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and happy Ramadan. Although I have never been here in person, I was a part of my school's renaming committee, so it's great to see everybody here without the ever-present sound of the Zoom dinging going off in the background.
And Ms. Salah, do you mind saying your name?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Noura Salah. I'm a senior at Ida B. Wells Barnett High School, and I'm going to attend University of Portland School of Nursing this coming fall. But I'm sitting. Thought I was standing when I wrote this. Okay. I am standing here before you today on my 4th day of fasting, since it is Ramadan, to convince you to readjust future school calendars to embrace Muslim students and staff by making the Islamic holiday Eid a day off. Or rather, that's what I should be doing. But first, I'm going to tell you a story. My whole life, I have struggled to convey my emotions through spoken word, whether that be a result of mispronunciation because of my cultural background or the nerves that always seem to take over. But writing has been a haven. If words are written down, they are given meaning, and nothing holds more power than a personal narrative, and here is mine. I love to learn. I still do, but when I was younger, my greatest joy was waking up early every morning to walk with my mother to school. I never missed a single day. Markham Elementary was my own safe place in a world that felt ever-changing. And at the end of every year, they would hold these giant school assemblies where all the students were packed into an auditorium, and the teachers would line up on stage and hand out awards to a select few students. They were silly things, certificates for the most mathematically inclined or the biggest science whiz. But when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, it feels as though they are the epitome of validation. And at the very end, the last award, Students with Perfect Attendance, was announced. It was the award I waited patiently for every time, because although I wasn't the most academically astute child, I showed up every day. Yet my name, or the name of any other Muslim student, was never called. Missing school for Eid was counted as ditching. As I grew older and continued to make my way through this path of education, it became less a feeling of invalidation and one of unfairness. My freshman year, Eid al-Fitr, the celebration of breaking your fast, the most anticipated Muslim holiday of the year, happened to fall in early June, and subsequently, finals week. I assumed I could make up the day's exams another time, hopefully before school was over. I was wrong. The rest of the week was spent studying for and taking my other tests. There was no extra time, and now that missed test leaves a permanent mark on my transcript. Earlier this year, it was announced that prom at my school would be held on April 30th, but the final week of April coincides with the holiest days on the Islamic calendar, the last 10 days of Ramadan. Muslim students would be fasting and unable to attend, a mistake that was only corrected after Muslim students spoke up. The lack of education surrounding Islam runs deep not only within Ida B. Wells High School, but this district as a whole. Muslim students are forced time and time again to advocate for ourselves in places we have zero representation. It is a constant reminder that when decisions concerning the student body are made, our existence is forgotten. The experiences I share with you today are not ones exclusive to myself, but a commonality among the Muslim student population. The lack of recognition is saddening, but even worse is the academic deficits as a result. Having to choose between your religion and your education is not something a student should have to do. In Portland Public Schools, we strive for equity and inclusion, but foster exclusion instead. And my peers with me today, along with all the Muslim and Jewish staff employed by this district, are only a fraction of the people who have suffered as a result. I compel you to listen to the voices you've heard today and work with us to reach a conclusion that I know aligns with your values. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anissa, Sophia, and Nura. Who wants to go after that?
We have Ginger Hussar.
Tired eyes, so I'm gonna look at my screen. Okay. So my name is Ginger Huizar, Huizar, and I am a teacher at George Middle School who teaches special education for 6th and 8th grade students. I'm here almost every month to speak to you. I'm also a parent of multiple PPS students. I have already sent my presentation that I created and had wanted to share, but I was told I can't share it. So I'm going to read it, but I have shared it with you, and I hope that you all take time to look at it. I wanted to highlight the racial educational equity policy that you have as a district and have created and hold up. For you, I highlighted it in red. So the pieces that are important for me are the educational equity means raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and highest performing students, and 2, eliminating the racial predictability and disproportionality of which student groups occupy the highest and lowest achievement categories. The concept of education equity goes beyond formal equality, and all students are treated, where all students are treated the same. You end this with PPS will provide additional and differentiated resources to support the success of all students, including students of color. The reason I am addressing those things is because PPS has said that staffing cuts are expected to be 2% across the board next year to everyone's department, no matter what. This is not upholding your own PPS equity policy. SPED staffing should not be what everyone else's is, because that is not equal, and it's not equitable. 2/3 of special education is made up of Black males alone, so that doesn't uphold your racial equity policy. PPS special education population is actually increasing despite what has been said out there. We got that recent data at our last SPED cadre, so it's coming from your own numbers. And that is also despite a 7,000 student decrease over the years, the past 5 years that you've had. So while the district is having less students, while somebody's language arts class might have less students, we are getting more students. PPS has a disproportionate discipline rate of students of color on IEPs. I've also shared that data with you in the slides that you received. I had wanted other people in the audience and watching to be able to see it, so I'm sorry that they cannot. And I want to end this by saying that I stand in solidarity as a BIPOC educator, as a parent of students of color, with our BIPOC teachers. We currently have a teacher who has been put on leave for some things that I see happen very regularly in agented classrooms. My opinion is that it is because he stands for what's right, he comes regularly to speak, and he does not back down, and his intenseness is not received well in a white supremacist space. So I want to ask the board to look into an audit of HR staffing practices, because it feels as if BIPOC teachers are being investigated and put on leaves disproportionately from our white teachers when we do not back down and do what is expected of us, when we are not intimidated by our employer. I am asking for transparency and accountability. I would love to know what that data is as a data specialist. And we need teachers like Mr. Chu in our schools doing the hard work that we do every day as BIPOC educators, creating spaces for our BIPOC students, who I just gave you the numbers for, are disproportionately penalized in our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Veronica Green.
Hello, Ms. Green.
Okay.
My name is Veronica Green, Green, and I am deeply invested in the PPS community. My son Julian attends Mount Tabor Middle School and my daughter Valentina attends Glencoe. I currently serve on the Portland Council PTA as the Vice President of the Franklin Cluster, and lastly, I work for PPS as the Lunch Lady for Creative Science. I am here tonight to ask the board to make nutrition services part of the PPS General Fund. By adding nutrition service workers, which by the way are mostly women, to the general fund, there will be more money to increase our wages and hire adequate staff. We all know that without kitchen staff and custodians, PPS schools could literally not open every day, and we continue to work even when schools are closed. What may not be known to you is the panic mode that we work in every single day. It seems that every day we're told to do more work in less time while still maintaining high quality work and great customer service. None of us are afraid of hard work. In fact, many of us thrive on it, but we do not thrive on being overworked and underpaid. The constant gaslighting from management makes us feel as if we aren't capable and we don't care, but the reality is we need more staff to get all the work done. Management has said flat out that it is really hard to retain workers in our department, and the workers we do have call in sick at a very high rate. Well, that is because, again, we're overworked and underpaid. I may not be college educated, but I'm not stupid. I know that the way to acquire and retain quality workers is to pay them a living wage and provide them with the support they need to be successful. We do not get the support we need because most of the time we can't get in contact with our managers because they're at schools working in a kitchen, doing a union job and getting paid a heck of a lot more than we are. When my youngest started kindergarten and I had to rejoin the workforce, the last thing I wanted to do was be a lunch lady. To my surprise, I can genuinely say that being a lunch lady is the most rewarding job I've ever had. Not only is it important work, but I truly love the kids at my school. I recently broke my leg, and actually I came back yesterday from an unpaid leave of absence, and you should see the enormous amount of get well cards and gifts from the kids at CSS. Meals and donations from families and staff of CSS have helped my family survive, but think about how messed up that is. My job doesn't pay enough to put anything into savings for emergencies like this, so I had to rely on donations and meals from parents and teachers at the school I work at. Let that sink in for a moment. We aren't asking for much. We aren't asking for a $75,000 bonus for doing our job. Most of us want to pay the bills, feed our family, and maybe have a few bucks left over to save or perhaps put some gas in the tank so we can drive to the coast or see a movie with our family. Please do the right thing and make nutrition services part of the general fund. We need to eliminate the systemic inequities caused by the longstanding practice of only funding nutrition services with federal dollars and grants. The board has the power to change this, and the board has the power to help make working families feel secure. Thank you.
Thank you. I loved my lunch lady at MLC. She was an amazing woman. She's not here anymore. She impacted a lot of students, including mine.
We have David Hall.
Hi there. My name is David Hall, spelled H-A-L-L. Dear Superintendent Guerrero, Student Representative Weinberg, and members of the board, thank you so much for this opportunity to address you this evening. Appreciate being here. I'm a school counselor at Access Academy. As you know, admission to Access via the lottery requires testing for intellectual giftedness within the 99th percentile. It also requires proof of demonstrated need beyond that which neighborhood schools are supported to provide. These needs are often tied to what is known as twice exceptionality. This means a student is diagnosed with a disability in conjunction with their giftedness. As such, our students at Access struggle with ADD, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, generalized anxiety, major depressive disorder, dyspraxia, obsessive compulsive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, dysgraphia, and sensory processing disorder. The result of these disabilities includes crippling perfectionism, severe school refusal, frequent emotional disturbance, communication difficulties, extreme self-doubt and negative talk, suicidal ideation, social awkwardness, and isolation. Our caseload of current and impending 504s is 42. We service 52 IEPs, meaning 30% of our students are forecasted to receive individualized instruction or classroom accommodations. Compounded with the loss of social learning due to the pandemic, ours is an extremely high social emotional needs population. Access Academy is housed in 2 different locations, elementary at Vestal and middle school at Lane. We're currently staffed as 2 small schools rather than 1 large school, and for this we are grateful. However, this fall we'll be moving into 1 building. Given the proposed staffing cuts, this long anticipated move for our school community is actually going to have devastating consequences. This is because our current staffing allocations are determined through the same process as all other neighborhood schools, despite the proven demonstrated high needs of our students. Therefore, we'll lose a full 6.2 FTE when we move. This will cut our support staff literally in half while we double the number of students we serve in our building. We're slated to lose the assistant principal, the school climate specialist, a counselor, a special education teacher, an education assistant, and secretarial, speech pathology, and Spanish teaching FTE. I have the utmost confidence in my colleagues who will remain on the job. However, I predict extreme negative consequences if these cuts are to be implemented. I know Access is known as a privileged program serving predominantly white boys. And yes, the district has much work to do in increasing identification of giftedness along racial and gender lines. However, just because you're an Access geek or nerd does not mean that school comes easily to you. Many soft skills are required in order to flourish in a school environment, and I believe it's irresponsible, negligent, and potentially illegal to implement the proposed staffing cuts. So please do everything in your power to ensure that Access Academy does not lose the forecasted 6.2 FTE, so that our students can receive the safety and social emotional supports that they so desperately deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Hall.
Thank you, Chair DePlas, Superintendent Guerrero, and directors. My name is Sarah Hall, H-A-L-L, and I'm a parent of a 3rd grader at Irvington Elementary School, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I'd like to first express my gratitude for the teachers, providers, and administrators who have risen above the challenges of COVID. Staffing shortages and inequities to teach our beloved children over the past several years. Like 15% of students in the district in 2021, our daughter receives special education services. She attends the Intensive Skills Classroom, or ISC, during approximately half of her school day for her core academic instruction in math, reading, and writing. This year, 2 of her ISC teachers have resigned within 6 months, which has made it a difficult year, but uncharacteristically, my daughter is at risk of not achieving her academic goals this year because of that disruption. This February, we received news that the Irvington ISC classroom will most likely close in the fall due to low enrollment. Although it's unclear how PPS can know the number of students who will qualify for ISC placement until IEP reviews this spring, or how many people will move into the district, the neighborhood rather, this summer. The district has made that forecast. There are currently 5 ISC classrooms in the district, with Irvington the only one in Northeast, Inner North Portland, or Inner Southeast. So our daughter will be bused elsewhere, presumably, although we don't know where yet, to attend a new all-day school in grade 4, after spending 4 years establishing bonds in her neighborhood school. So she'll go to a new school where she knows no one. While our children in special education are resilient, they should have the opportunity to attend their neighborhood school within the least restrictive environment as protected by federal civil rights laws, the IDEA Act of 1997 and 2004, as you are all well aware and in support of. In the absence of this possibility, students, like my daughter, should have the opportunity to attend an elementary school within their district quadrant, so that within reasonable geographic proximity, so that they may have the opportunity to re-meet their peers in middle and high school. We should not be relocating our most vulnerable students, those who may experience anxiety, social disorder, or cognitive disabilities, and require them to reestablish themselves in new communities midstream in elementary school. I know I don't need to remind you that you passed in 2020 resolution establishing March as National Developmental Disabilities Month, establishing that disability is not the problem. The problem is that society does not create welcoming, supportive environments, policies, and systems for all. And you as a board resolve to galvanize efforts to create real system change in order for disabled students to receive those services. So what I'm asking and suggesting is that the Portland Northeast Quadrant is far too large for one ISC classroom, and that PPS establish continuity for students within Northeast Portland, and that you co-locate the K2 and 3-5 special education classrooms in the same school. Students should not have to ask, why do I have to leave my school? Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly Grundy.
Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Kelly Grundy. Last name is spelled Grunde. Sorry, I'm coming over something, so I'm a little shaky. I am the mother to 2 current kindergartners and a 6th grader in PPS, and the current Lewis Elementary PTA co-president. I'm here to talk about the proposed budget with over 140 elementary positions being cut. This will be my 7th consecutive year at Lewis. I have had children in class sizes ranging from 18 to 34, and I can say with full confidence, class size matters. I can see and feel the difference in my child's school experience when a teacher can actually teach. The confidence that my child gains in their education is irreplaceable. I can also see and feel the difference when a teacher is not able to do their job due to circumstances beyond their control. My current 6th grader was in a class of over 30 for both 4th and 5th grade. They are now in a much bigger middle school pool and are doing all they can just to stay afloat. The skills and confidence that a child is expected and deserves to learn in their elementary years is not able to happen when teachers are spread thin and cannot connect with each student. This is coming from a white privileged voice, one that has the ability to help her children. It angers me to think of those students who are systemically underserved and the impact that larger class sizes and less attention will have on them. My current kindergartners are in a class of 18 and thriving. Next year, 3 kindergarten classes are being combined into 2 for 1st grade, which means a class size of at least 28. They are the first class to start full-time since the pandemic, and most of these students did not attend preschool. They are still learning fine motor skills and social skills. With support staff also facing significant cuts, there will be less support and more students for teachers next year. This is unacceptable. The combination of large class sizes and less support serves no one, not students or teachers. As a community, it will ultimately result in children with greater needs, both academically and socially and emotionally. If the goal of our district is to set students up for success, the decision to cut teachers acts to undermine this goal. PPS is facing lower enrollment, as is all of Oregon, but I'm here to talk to the people who make a difference in PPS. That is you, the school board, who we elected to be our voice. I ask you this: does cutting staff at a time when it is not necessary seem like the right choice to support students and make PPS a desirable district that families want to stay or come back to. We will lose valuable talent as staff seeks employment elsewhere. Is this a message we want to send out as a district? Does this make sense? Is this how we want to emerge from a pandemic that is being felt in every area of our schools, from the custodians to the librarians? These are my requests. I implore you to ask questions about the budget and to question new hires at the administration level. Why are we hiring so many upper administration positions at a time when you are making cuts where it has the greatest impact on our children? Shouldn't we preserve what has the greatest impact on our future? Keep our staffing levels intact. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maxine Dexter.
Good evening, Maxine Dexter, D-E-X-T-E-R. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm a PPS parent for the past 14 years and speak tonight in my capacity as a state legislator. I represent House District 33, which includes Lincoln Cluster and part of Roosevelt Cluster as of January. As some of you know, I am a lung and critical care physician, and I've been in the thick of challenges with COVID-19. After spending significant time talking with educators, students, parents, principals, and some of you, it is clear that the education and healthcare sectors have endured very similar stressors, and this is directly tied to the immense pressure and strain our community has shouldered. I speak to you today with that insight and to bring forward a clear request to prioritize the health and education of students above any other consideration, and to do it in sincere partnership with the educators of this district. Every single part of the education system is strained beyond anything many of us have ever seen or experienced. You're transparently holding yourselves accountable to equitably prioritizing the holistic health and academic success of students will help bring along with you, all of us, as hard decisions are made. Prioritizing students in this post-COVID time means prioritizing support for the educators, staff, and systems that support students. This includes our counselors, our para-educators, our bus drivers, our nutrition workers, our custodial staff, our nurses, our social workers, everyone who supports students. We cannot deliver for our students and families if the system and the people who make it all possible are overstrained. We are experiencing a similar challenge in the healthcare sector, and I know this for a fact. Students will suffer if the people caring for them are suffering. Good teachers, like good nurses, will leave the profession they love when it takes too much of a toll on them for too little reward. Hard budget decisions need to be made. Before you make them, I hope you will ask yourselves intentionally whether the decision you are supporting is clearly prioritizing students and is including educators in your decision-making process. This is the time where equitable investments must be made to help our students who need the most support. I am concerned about George Middle School, who's facing a proposed 9% FTE cut in a community where 85% of its students are historically underserved and over half qualify for free lunch. Those students are some of the most at risk in our district, and before those cuts are made, I want to understand that there is absolutely no other option. I agree that teacher development and training is important, and I will unflinchingly say those teachers can be trusted to work with you on how to balance your investment in their success and the success of everyone's students. Communicating and collaborating, agreeing on how to approach complex problems takes time and effort, and it is also the best way to succeed when times are hard. I support spending down the current 13% reserve fund to 5 to 8% to meet 2023's educational needs. As a legislator who is a first-gen college graduate, I know the importance of state investments in public education. I will do all I can to advocate to meet the funding gap that Oregon schools are concerned about facing in 2024. Thank you for listening, thank you for your service, and I look forward to us working together.
Thank you.
That concludes who we have signed up for public comment.
Thank you, and thank you all for your comments. If you have additional materials, please feel free to connect with our board manager, Roseanne Powell. If you have something you'd specifically like to follow up with. We're going to go to Student Representatives report. Student Representative Weinberg, would you like to share your report this evening?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
And could I ask you to do a brief update on the conference as well?
The NSBA?
Yes.
All right. We're doing conference reports later. Can I wait to do that then?
You can.
Okay.
I just thought I would wrap them into one.
Okay.
But
so
you may do it at the appropriate time.
Yeah, I think I'm going to wait.
Okay.
I wanted to thank the 3 Ida B. Wells students who came forward and testified, because I had a similar conversation with student board members from around the country this weekend at the National National School Board Association conference this weekend. And in that conversation, one county came forward as having made a huge step in recognizing the religious diversity present in their district, and that's Fairfax County, which passed a regulation last year preventing or not allowing tests, quizzes, sporting events, school events, or parent-teacher conferences to occur on religious holiday observances. So not only did they recognize Muslim and Jewish holidays, but they also recognized, here we go. Dia de los Muertos, Diwali, Lunar New Year, Ramadan, Good Friday, and many other religious holidays that students of those religious faiths often have to miss school for or miss sporting events for. And a conversation came up about how a lot of students are having to choose between attending school and taking a test, attending their sporting event, and celebrating the religious holiday. So I wanted to, and I circulated this with the entire board, so I wanted to have a continuing conversation about what more we can do to support the minority religious beliefs of our district. And also, a week ago, a bill banning education on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through 3rd grade in Florida was signed into law. And recently, a similar bill was introduced in the Ohio State Legislature. I am in defiant opposition to this bill that politicizes the sexual orientation and gender expression of students. All students deserve to be welcomed in their schools free from discrimination. These bills stand in stark contrast to that belief. My heart goes out to the LGBTQ+ students of Florida. I am disgusted by the actions of your legislature that supported this bill and thinks that queerness is not age appropriate. And so, I sit before you all as a proud queer person to say, homophobia and hate speech of any kind have no place in our schools. Queer people do not deserve to feel more isolated. Our identities are not taboo or something that children need to be sheltered from. We deserve to be celebrated and not made to feel unwelcome in our own community. LGBTQ+ teens are 6 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression than non-LGBTQ+ identifying teens. LGBTQ+ youth are more than twice as likely to feel suicidal and more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide compared to their heterosexual youth. 48% of transgender adults report that they have considered suicide in the last year. I say this to highlight the isolation that LGBTQ+ students already experience in our school system. Bills like the Don't Say Gay bill further isolate students. At PPS, LGBTQ+ students will always be welcomed, accepted, and valued. But to that end, I challenge all of us on this board and our entire community to continue our work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and go beyond the letter of the law and embody the value that all students belong. Establishing a strong policy is not enough to support students in our schools or to prevent discrimination in our schools. The acts of hateful graffiti around the district this past month should be evidence of that enough. I have witnessed slurs being yelled down the hallway at students and personally been called a faggot and shoved in the hallway this year. PPS needs to prioritize a culture shift that prioritizes inclusion in our schools and equipping students and teachers with the skills to address hate in their schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We stand with you and all LGBTQ students and faculty, staff. Thank you for your comments. We're going to move now to board committee reports. Can we start with the audit committee, please? Great. Policy?
We have a number of items that will be introduced, first reading and second reading later on the agenda, so that should be the report.
That was brief.
Well, the next stuff on the agenda isn't.
Elections.
We also have a resolution tonight, which we'll be talking about.
Intergovernmental.
I sent an email to our colleagues after public testimony today that we had a really great presentation on nutrition services and how the funding of that works. At the Intergovernmental Committee meeting, Director Hollins and I were there and got to ask lots of great questions of Whitney about what it looks like. And I think it's really important for us as we consider looking at our budget and thinking about nutrition services. Both the USDA waiver that has allowed all students to have free meals this year will be ending. And so that's going to be a huge issue for many of our students. 200% of poverty level is where SNAP benefits are. And we realize that a lot of our families need school lunch, but it's not necessarily affordable for them, even at the rates that will be in place next year. So to think about what it would take to continue lunch for all, breakfast for all, and then also looking at, we know our nutrition service workers, we have a lot of women of color in that area, and how do we continue to support those workers the best we can. So it's a great presentation by Whitney, lots of great questions as we continue to have those conversations as a board. I'd encourage you to watch the YouTube of Whitney's presentation.
Thank you for that thorough report. Those are all, it's an important issue, I think, to think about how we continue that care of our students who are living at 200% of the poverty level.
And I would encourage us to, when we do talk to our national representatives, to encourage them to pursue free lunch for all students as part of our national delegations. As we talk about broadband for all, lunch for all is another thing I think is crucially important for our student success.
Thank you so much. Alternative and charter schools?
No report, although we have a meeting coming up on the 13th, and I would encourage everybody to tap in.
Is that all? That's so brief.
You're like trying to generate more.
I'm just concerned about him. You're not talking very much.
I'm listening tonight.
Excellent. And then Facilities and Operations, Director Hollins. Did you have a report? And we can't hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Don't have any report. No, we have one coming up. I better get the report at the last one. But I did want to comment on the Intergovernmental Committee about the nutrition services, if I can.
Please.
So I listening to that presentation and the good that has happened, and I want to try to make sure that we are highlighting the positive stuff that's happened. And I can't remember the numbers because I'm literally in the car right now. But we serve so many more kids by being able to offer food for everyone. And I think, when you look at things like inequities and whether it's financial inequities, economic inequities, racial inequities, there's a few times where you see things that actually work to help resolve those inequities. And when I was looking at the numbers of the presentation that they gave, that was a perfect example of how we can move in the right direction when we talk about inequity, especially food inequities. And I'm going to echo what Director Lowry was saying, that everyone should really look at that presentation because I think, as we look at things that we can do, things that we need to be intentional doing, things that, we talk about, but it's actually happening in real practice. That is a great example of the things that we can actually do when it's been intentional. And the fact that it took a pandemic to get us to do that, I think that's one of the great things, because now we know what we can do to make some of those inequities change. And so I would definitely echo again what Director Larry say, look at that presentation and really look at budgeting of how we can make a change in that relatively quickly as well. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Director Hollins, and there's all kinds of ways of describing food insecurity and the poverty level, but the real truth is that there are some kids that are unhoused, that don't have access to cooking facilities that attend our schools, or are in a hotel room that doesn't have cooking facilities, or are living in food deserts, or are just experiencing poverty. And it's those kids that, I mean, keep me up at night and get me out of bed in the morning, motivated to serve those kids. And I completely agree about that this is a tangible effort that actually makes a real difference at a very human, at a cellular level for our students. So thank you for your comments.
And I want to respond, Director Lowry, on your point about advocacy. I don't know if the superintendent has anything more that he can share, but the Council of Great City Schools has elevated this to near the top of their advocacy agenda, because needless to say, no districts want to go back after having had the opportunity to, remove the barriers to free meals. It is an area of...
I think we can all agree that ensuring our students have nutrition every day while they're under our care seems like a fundamental support. That's never a bad investment. And hopefully the federal government continues to look at this issue closely and thinks about the benefits during the pandemic and how to maintain the levels higher than maybe traditionally we've seen. But that doesn't preclude any school system from going beyond that and making larger investments. That's a choice we make. But again, keeping our children fed seems like a primary need.
Thank you. I'm going to report just really briefly. I attended the National School Boards Association conference over the last few days in San Diego for the first time, and 100% of the sessions I attended were on board governance. And it's just the sheer amount of sessions on board governance. I mean, every day there were at every session just about. So some of the topics were understanding the key work of school boards, ready, set, govern, effective superintendent evaluation, the 7 habits of high-performing boards, board self-evaluation and why it matters. And the one session I could not attend had to do with the science of reading, and that was because I was talking to a constituent, and it went longer than I would have liked. But we heard perfect examples in some of these sessions about why the way that we operate as a board matters and how we hold ourselves accountable through self-evaluations. And anyway, it was very impactful. I also heard about CUBE for the first time. That's the Council for Urban Boards of Education. And that was really cool. That was a completely different crowd from the national school boards. It was kind of a breakout, and I got to mingle with other board members of color from around the country, from the South, from Mississippi, Alabama, Fairfax, Illinois, Fairfax, Virginia. And anyway, it was really great. I would encourage us to look at the CUBE conference that's coming up, I believe, this fall in Miami. It would be, I would think, a really great one to attend. We're going to move now to the presentation of MAP growth. Superintendent Guerrero, can you please introduce this next item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't think I've said good evening, directors. Tonight, our Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability, Dr. Renard Adams, he's getting situated here. He's going to be providing directors with the summary results of our student mid-year MAP assessment. The MAP, which stands for Measures of Academic Progress, is an adaptive achievement and growth test. This more personalized assessment experience adjusts to each student's learning level. It offers a precise measurement of the progress and growth for each individual student. These are indicators which we're watching carefully to inform us as to whether our students, especially our students of color, are making expected progress and growth this school year. Whether we're narrowing opportunity gaps across the school system, for instance. These are all questions we're reflecting on. And here to walk us through tonight's progress report, Dr. Adams.
Good evening, board. Is my mic on? There we go. Good evening, board directors, student representative Weinberg. A shout out to Ms. Powell, who's running the slides for me. I appreciate that tonight. We're happy to be with you again for another data dive, this time into our growth data so we can see how well our students have grown between the beginning of the school year through the winter. I'll be happy to take questions at the end. I promise you that the presentation won't go quite as long as the slides might suggest. Could I have the next slide, please? These are tonight's guiding questions that frame the presentation. First, we learned a lot from when we presented in the fall, or the winter rather, and so we wanted to make sure we circled back to some things. And so we're going to talk about briefly the demographics and participation rates of students who tested this winter and have growth scores. There was also some questions around how is student achievement looking now compared to prior to the pandemic. So we went back and took a look at that this winter to the winter before COVID forced all schools closed. Then we'll talk about the percentage of students who met their fall to winter growth targets in reading and mathematics. And then finally, we'll take a look at our progress toward the board goals for third grade reading and fifth grade mathematics with a staff recommendation moving forward. If we could have the next slide, please. Let's start with participation rate and growth counts, and this way we'll have a sense of the size of each of the student groups. In order to calculate growth, a student must have 2 MAP scores from different test windows. In our case, we're looking at fall of this school year and winter from just a few weeks ago. On the screen are the counts of each student group with growth scores in math, meaning these students tested both in the fall and again in the winter. You'll note the relatively smaller count of Native and Pacific Islander students. I also wanted to call your attention to a few of our student categories. Underserved students are any student who identifies as Black, Latino, Native, or Pacific Islander, and we also include students who chose multiracial but identified themselves as one of those 4 groups as well. Multiracial underserved students are those students who are multiracial and identify as Black, Latino, Native, or Pacific Islander. And then multiracial not underserved are students who identify as multiracial who select both Asian and white as their identifying categories. Could I have the next slide, please, Roseanne? Thank you. On this slide, we have the percentage of each student group with growth scores in mathematics. As you can see, the percentages range from a low of 56% for Native students in grade 2 to a high of 96% for Asian students in grade 6 and Pacific Islander students in grade 5. Our overall participation rate just for the winter test was 93%, so it's the highest participation rate we've ever achieved in PPS. Next slide. Ms. Powell, if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you.
May I ask, I'm on the slide that's MAP growth score percentages, and I'm sorry, I took a break for a moment, and you said 93, is that just the overall?
The overall participation rate was 93% for this winter, yes ma'am. Next, we'll take a look at reading growth score counts. Again, here as before, please note those relatively small sizes of the Native and Pacific Islander student groups. That matters when we look at percentages because a small change in who does or doesn't make growth can cause what looks like a wild swing in performance. If we have the next slide, please. And here are the percentages of each student group with growth scores in reading. Overall, the percentages in reading are slightly higher than they were for math. Let that linger. All right, if I can have the next slide. Thank you. Before we dive into our MAP growth results, we wanted to take another peek into our new student baseline of performance to get a sense of what has happened since the pandemic began. There was much interest in December in comparing our student achievement now as compared to student achievement prior to the onset of the pandemic. And in order to do this, we examined students' percentile ranks. On the next 2 slides, you will see the median percentile ranks of student groups by grade and subject. As a reminder, a percentile rank of 60 means that performance is on average as well as or better than 60% of peers. Higher percentile ranks, therefore, generally signal higher levels of student achievement. Could I have the next slide? So these are our math percentile rank changes. For purposes here, we compared the percentile ranks from the winter of 1920, just before the pandemic began, to the percentile ranks of this current year, 21-22. Here are those comparisons for mathematics. In 1920 is shown in red, 2021 is shown in teal, and the arrows show the degree and direction of change, positive, negative, or no change. In mathematics, most student groups are performing at levels now that are lower than where students were performing prior to the pandemic. You'll note there are lots of down arrows here. Of note, please also notice the differences in the percentile rank or achievement among the different racial student groups. Our African American, Latino, Native American, and Pacific Islander students are achieving at levels that are lower than their white and Asian peers. African American achievement is generally below the 25th percentile, and Latino achievement is slightly above the 25th percentile, while white student achievement hovers between the 50th and the 75th percentile. Could I have the next slide, please? In reading, our gaps between the student groups remain consistent and persistent. There was less overall loss of achievement as compared to mathematics, and if you think back to when we talked in December, our reading achievement data was a little bit higher than our math achievement data, and so we're seeing something similar here with this achievement comparison. So there was less overall loss, with the exception, again, of our Native and our Pacific Islander students who are showing more dramatic losses, and we need to do some more investigation to understand, because those groups aren't very large, so we need to look at and are looking at why we have those bigger swings there, because we know one or two students can grossly affect what that looks like. So our conclusions, we've got to have the next slide in this section of the presentation, is overall, Ms. Powell, thank you. Overall, our student performance is lower now than it was prior to the pandemic, the onset of the pandemic. Our declines are more pronounced in mathematics than in reading, which goes back to the fall when our math achievement scores were much lower than the reading achievement scores. And then we still have those gaps that are persisting between our students of color and their white and Asian peers. Could I have the next slide? Now let's transition into examining our mathematics and reading growth for our students. First, as a reminder, in order to be included in these analyses, students needed to have tested both in the fall and the winter. Next, we should note that MAP is a norm reference test. The results across a large group of students will generally follow the shape of the normal curve or the bell curve. Under this normal distribution, 50% of students could be expected to meet or exceed their growth expectations, while 50% of students would typically not be expected to meet those expectations. What we're intending, however, is to shift that performance to the right so we get greater than 50% of students making their growth targets. So as we look at the coming slides, please think of 50% growth as the minimum growth expectation. Growth results higher than 50% are very good, and pushing growth to 60% or more is exceptional, as it means we have shifted the distribution of student achievement and are closing gaps over time as most students are growing. Conversely, as we look at the coming slides, please recognize that growth results lower than 50% generally indicate that students are losing ground over time because they're not meeting their growth targets. And if that happens year over year, they will fall further and further behind. If I could have the next slide, please. In math, as we look across the assessed grades, and here that in math we assess in grades 2 through 8, we see that growth is above 50% for all grade levels in the aggregate, and is at least 60% in grades 4 and 5. You may recall that in December, our math achievement results were lower than they were in reading. This means that students had more growth to make from a lower starting point and may be a factor in the positive levels of growth seen here on the slide. Additionally, we have a math curricular adoption in K-5 and 2 standards-aligned curricular pilots in middle schools, and the use of those materials are hopefully impacting these growth data as well. If I could have the next slide. Now we'll transition into mathematics growth by grade level and student group. In grade 2, you will note that Asian students and English learners are growing at higher percentages than are their peers, with multiracial students who identify as one of the underserved groups, Native students, Pacific Islander students, and students with disabilities growing at a percentage lower than 50%, which is below our minimum expectation. Could I have the next slide, please? In grade 3, all student groups met or exceeded the minimum growth expectations with the exception of our native students, where only 47% of students met their growth targets. If I could have the next slide. We see more promising results in grade 4 mathematics, where all student groups made at least the minimum amount of growth, and with the most amount of growth being shown by white and Asian students. In grade 5, which is the next slide, our native students here are losing ground, as you see, compared to all of their peers, with just 38% of students achieving their growth targets. And then in grade 6, on the next slide, as we enter middle school and examine grade 6, we see that more student groups are not meeting the minimum expectation of 50% growth. Here, underserved students of color, Black, Latino, and English learners had growth results lower than 50%, with our Pacific Islander students showing the lowest percentage of growth overall. In grade 7, Latino, Native, and white students, as well as students with disabilities, met or exceeded the minimum growth expectation of 50%, as did our multiracial students who are not members of an underserved group. All other student groups approached but did not quite meet the growth expectation of 50%. And finally, for mathematics in grade 8, we see stronger performance as compared to grade 7. Here, all student groups met that 50% threshold of growth, and most exceeded 50% growth by several percentage points. Now let's take a look at reading. Overall reading growth looks a bit different than overall math growth, as you can see by the slide. Here, as the grade levels increase, the observed growth decreases, such that by the time we look at students in middle school, their growth is lower than 50% on average, which means that most students are losing ground over time. These are certainly data that the middle school redesign team will want to examine as they continue their work on enhancing the middle school student experience. While the elementary grades are over 50%, we really want to see some 60% growth like we did in math. Next, we'll dive into reading growth by grade level as we did with math and unpack these a little bit more. In grade 3, reading growth was highest, and that shows on this slide, where you'll note that all student groups exceeded the 50% minimum growth expectation. While we would prefer to see some of this growth pushing to the 60% range, these data do show that more than half of the students in each of the groups are making growth. In grade 4, we begin to see differential reading growth. Here, our Native and Pacific Islander students are demonstrating growth in the 30% range, which means that most students are losing ground as compared to their peers. Curiously, we see some decreases in growth as compared to 3rd grade for most of the remaining student groups. In grade 5, we see that our Native and Pacific Islander students are growing at the lowest rates, 38% and 35% respectively, with our Asian students' growth far outpacing the growth of all other student groups, with a growth percentage of 65%. While we observed most students meeting the minimum growth expectation in grade 5, here in grade 6, we see that most students did not achieve that 50% minimum threshold. And again, our Pacific Islander students continue to lose relative ground to their peers, with only 1/3 of them meeting or exceeding their growth expectations. In grade 7, only white students and students with disabilities met the minimum expectation of 50% growth. Recall that we really wish growth to be 60% or greater for all students. In this grade, the remaining student groups are all below 50% of growth and are therefore losing some instructional ground as compared to their white peers and their peers who receive special education services. And finally, in grade 8 reading, we see that English learners, Asian students, and multiracial students who are underserved met that threshold of growth, while all other students did not reach 50%. Overall, it's troubling that so many students across grades 6 through 8 did not meet their growth targets and are therefore losing ground over time. We know that we need to accelerate student growth to reach our desired achievement levels, and that these current rates will not be enough for us to reach desired outcomes for our students. And so in conclusion for this section, could I have the next slide, Ms. Powell? Thank you. Our growth in mathematics was stronger across all grade levels as compared to growth in reading. Our reading growth was higher at the elementary levels than it was at the middle school level. And then the lack of a standards line K-8 reading curriculum likely impacted reading growth. We know we're in the process of bringing forth an adoption for English language arts to this board for next school year. And we know that while lower fall achievement in math was what we saw in December and again here, we do have adopted curriculum K-5 and standards aligned piloted curriculum in K-8 that are likely positively impacting the math growth. And so for the final section of tonight's presentation, we wanted to have a conversation about our progress towards board goals, the elementary goals in third grade reading and fifth grade math. As directors are aware, these were adopted in October of 2019, and as this year is the first year since that we actually have fall to winter growth data again, it's our first opportunity to see how much progress has been made. The next slide is just a reminder of what those board adopted goals for third grade reading, and fifth grade mathematics are. In both instances, we're focusing on underserved students of color and intending to raise their student growth levels to at least 60% by this spring. If I could have the next slide. And here are our results for the third grade reading board goal. Please note that we did not do fall testing during the 2020-2021 school year. Therefore, there are no growth results for that year. The board goal of 60% growth is shown by the solid black horizontal line. While we did not meet the board goal in reading during the 2021-2022 school year, significant progress toward the goal was made. 54% of students met or exceeded their growth targets for this year. These are underserved students of color, which is an 8 percentage point increase over the last year of growth data in 1920. And so we do want to celebrate that. The next slide, we'll take a look at fifth grade mathematics, where we got even closer to the board goal. We came closer to that board goal of 60% growth, and moreover, in mathematics, saw double-digit gains compared to the last year we had fall to winter growth. Here, underserved students of color growth improved by 15 percentage points this year as compared to 1920. And so with that, we know that, if I could have the next slide, we still have much work to do. Our takeaway is just that we have work to do and we have come close to the board goals, but we've not yet achieved them. And we're hopeful that as we focus on educator effectiveness through professional learning, high-yield instructional practices, and high-quality curriculum materials, we will realize both these board goals and the promise of the graduate portrait. And that brings us to my very last slide, which is a recommendation for these elementary board goals. We are recommending that the board keep the current grade 3 and grade 5 goals and extend them for one more year or until 2023. Given the growth we have seen this year, we feel that this is reasonable. It would be reasonable to expect the goal to be met in another year, especially with ongoing initiatives that are underway. We are working with the regional superintendents to refine the school improvement process, and will be bringing the school improvement plans into greater alignment with board goals for the coming school year. At the same time, we will be adopting a comprehensive English language arts curriculum and providing professional learning on it, as well as for our Ready Math adoption that is currently in progress. Greater alignment between the curriculum and assessment, all grounded by a unified systemic instructional framework, should yield advances in student achievement and growth. Yet another reason to maintain the current board goals is the current lack of a viable substitute. Currently, there are no other systemic measures of student achievement or growth, so if we were to shift, there's not something to which we could shift. The Oregon Summative Assessment System is underway right now. Those results, however, won't be available until later this fall. With that said, at this time next school year, the OSAS data and the MAP data would be available, and the board could make a determination on which measure or both that they want to keep and maintain with both in hand in terms of third grade reading and fifth grade math. And so again, our recommendation is to keep the current board goals in 3rd and 5th grade and to extend them for one more year until the spring of 2023. And with that, I'm prepared, and the team's here with me to take any questions you might have.
Board
I got
directors, do
questions.
we have any questions?
I got questions. I think it's, first of all, I want to say, my guy, that's a lot of slides, and you tell me every time to wait till the end for all the questions so you can get all your stuff out, and you know that I'm not going to remember all the stuff that I'm wanting to talk about.
You figured me out.
And I know that you do that on purpose, so I just want to say it out loud so that you know I know what you're doing. But with that being said,
Did you know that you can annotate the slides in board book?
I can't. I've tried. I've been trying to work on them. I've been trying
You
to
know
get
who
them to
can tell
switch
you?
over.
Miss Bradshaw.
Somebody need to help me because it's a whole new class. We had one upstairs. I need another one for down here. Thank you. Thank you for the information. I both love you and hate you for the information at the exact same time.
I understand. I'm not always the bearer of great news
Yeah,
at the moment.
so I just want to throw that out
understand
there
that.
to you also. But I do appreciate, you know what I'm saying, putting it all on the table, you know, put the good, the bad, the ugly out there, and then it's up to me now to deal with it and figure out how to move forward. With that being said, on the recommendation, I'd actually literally just wrote a note based on those, the board goals and the question around alignment with our contract, because it doesn't sound to me that the board goals that you're asking us to continue with line up with the contract agreement of what we said we were going to do. And I want to know if am I off in that, or
What do you mean exactly?
I think
I kind of had a similar question.
yeah, so maybe I should ask the question. The one that we just did for the superintendent,
Right.
what he's being based on and what he's being graded on.
So,
you know,
yeah,
so if
it-
we're
it's
grading him
regarding the
on one thing and
performance
then
goals.
we're doing something else, is he going to get fired because
I
he
should
failed
certainly
to
hope
do
not.
he failed to do well? I'm just I need to put it all out there, right? Is he going to get fired or be coming up for firing because he failed to do it based on the contract that we put these stipulations out there that we want to see this, this, and this, and then we have board goals that say something completely different. So if there is a misalignment between the two things, then I believe it becomes absolutely imperative that we figure out how we get the things in alignment, because I don't want him, you know what I'm saying, looking like, okay, so I can't do both. And I believe when we were talking about the contract that you had a decision, you know, you got a choice to make. It wasn't like we told him what he was going to do. He had the opportunity to choose. So now my question becomes, because based of he made a choice was made, did that choice misalign with where we're currently at and what we're going to be grading on? And so I just want to put all that out there, because if we don't talk about it, then it's one of those things where I thought this and I thought that, and I don't believe in that world.
So I want to speak into this, because my understanding of how the contract sort of came together was that you and Director Hollins and Director Brim-Edwards really wanted to make sure that we were holding the superintendent accountable to especially Black achievement. And so that the three of you proposed that somebody said tonight in public comment, the superintendent asked for this. The superintendent did not ask for this. This was something y'all proposed as the way to give him a bonus if he met these benchmarks. And when it was explained to me in the briefing about the contract, I was told that these benchmarks were actually in alignment with our board goals, that it was a 3% increase. There are three $25,000 pieces in the contract. One is a 3% increase. Anyone gonna help me here, because I'm not super sure what the provisions were. And my understanding was that those three provisions that were added into the contract met our board goals and were in alignment with them. So that was my understanding. Is that not?
So they're different things, but I think we should be absolutely clear. There's nothing, it's an incentive. There's no firing. I mean, I think we really need to be absolutely clear that the overall performance in the contract relates to both the board goals generally, and then the specific items that you're referencing, which are those ones are growth, and the ones that you're referencing are proficiency, and that is in addition to, not here's what happens if you don't meet them. They are designed to be accelerators and not a disincentive.
I'll also say that the staff recommendation to maintain the board goals that we set in 2019 gives us a target, because if we reset those targets this year, the calibration might be off. So in other words, we have board goals already stated. The staff recommendation is that we maintain those for one more year. We rethink about it. We've had a pandemic in between the time we set those and established those board goals and today. And so it's just the recommendation from staff that we maintain the board goals. And we saw that the presentation, Dr. Adams said that we were close, but not at 60%. So we didn't meet the growth targets or the proficiency targets.
If I may, I would not. I think I would be ill-poised to recommend a change to a measure that we haven't seen the results of yet, right? And so while the Oregon State Summative Assessment is in the superintendent's contract, we haven't seen what those results will look like this year yet. And I think once the board sees those results, and we then have another year of MAP data, this board can then make a decision about how they wish their goals to be in alignment with what they have as performance incentives or not. But I think now it just feels a little premature because it's sight unseen. And I don't know how my team and I would help set targets for the future without knowing what our baseline is.
Without having that baseline, that's correct.
Did you get your questions answered? Herman? Sorry, Director Holland.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right, so I'm trying to wrap my head around all these delays that recently been coming up with stuff. If we set these in 2019 and then they didn't get met, they just didn't get met. To keep pushing the goalposts back or keep pushing everything back, it just seems like that's going to be it just seems like it's a constant theme recently. I think it's imperative to make sure that the goals that we set align with the superintendent contract. It should align with the superintendent evaluation. Everything should be in alignment. There shouldn't be one set of guidelines over here, another set of guidelines over there, this for this person, that for that person. If we're going to be really a true efficient board, everything should be in alignment. The fact that whether, and we're putting everything out on the table, when we asked for performance measures, that was so we can support the contract. And now he could have chose, and the board could have just went ahead and did it on their own, but they wouldn't have had the support of everyone. So let's put it out on the table. Let's just be honest and upfront about that. This is what me and Director Green, Director Berman Edwards, we were like, in order for us to support a contract, this is what we like. He could have said no, and he could have got the 4 votes anyway. So let's be clear about that. So when he said he asked for it, no, he didn't ask for it, but this is what we asked for as far as to be supportive of his contract. But I'm happy that we came to that agreement. I defend the contract. I've been defending the contract to community members almost on a weekly basis about why is this, why is that. But when we're talking about board goals, I think, once again, everything should be in alignment. If we're out of alignment because we have this set of pieces over here, this set of pieces over there, then we're going to always have these differentiation things that, like Director Green says, well, if this is over here, we're measuring them by, but then we're measuring the board goals by this, that's not an alignment. And so I feel we should have an alignment from the superintendent contract to the superintendent evaluation to the board goals. Because by those standards, then that's what we're expecting the superintendent to hold everybody else down the line standards to. We want proficiencies, we want growth. Now you can use growth as a tool, as a target, as another measuring tool to get to those. And it doesn't have to necessarily be this and, this can be an and. We should be using MAP and the SBAC performance pieces. It's not we use one or the other. So if we're in alignment, and say, okay, this is what all these things are in alignment because this is what it says, we can still use the map testing. The one doesn't go away. One doesn't preclude the other. We can use both to get to the goal because the goal is to make sure our kids is getting the education that they need. That's what we're all here for. That's what we got elected for. That's what everybody here gets paid for. And that's our job to do that. So whether if we're in alignment, then everybody can go in the same direction.
So, thanks, Director Hollins. I guess sorry, I'm not really sure where to go with this. I think it's on the board. I don't disagree with what you said about being in alignment. I think it's on the board though to figure out when and how we do that. And I guess since we're putting it on the table, we flagged at the time that the measures in the contract were not in alignment with the board goals, and then the decision was, okay, we'll figure that out later. Now is the time, right? Now is the later to sort of figure that out. The challenge we have as a board is we don't have the data on the SBAC. Is that the same as the OSAS?
It is.
Okay,
OSAS is the newer name.
All right,
Yes,
good.
sir.
I'll start switching. So we don't have the data on OSAS to set. I know, right? I'm with you. To set those new board goals. We will have that data, I think, come this fall. And so I think that's a conversation we can have then. Right now, what we have is the MAP data, which is related to the board goals we adopted 2 years ago. And I agree with your last statement pretty strongly. We can use both of these. They're not unrelated. They are actually, I think, quite related. They're not exactly, correlated, but they are related. And, I'm not sure there's a huge problem having board goals that use MAP and measure growth and having a contract that, uses OSAS and measures proficiency. Again, as long as we're moving in the right direction, we're going to see increases on both those. But I think that's the exact conversation, and I think it's on us as a board, not on staff, to sort of make that decision. What we have is a recommendation from staff, given the data right now, to keep those goals. And I also want to push back a little, Director Hollins. You said moving the goalposts. I think we've been very clear today that we missed those goals. That was actually the takeaway from the presentation is we had these goals. We missed them. I think there's a lot of reasons why. Global pandemic is probably one of the dominant reasons for that, and you saw that decline everywhere. But we missed it, and now the question is, do we just keep that 60% and say, one more year, we're going to try and achieve it, or do we come up with something else? I don't think that's moving the goalpost. I think it's acknowledging where we are and then saying, okay, given where we are, where do we want to be next year?
It's also acknowledging a lower baseline than we would have expected had the pandemic not been part of this. So when we establish those goals, we establish them with the best thinking at the time, and this is our baseline.
A bigger hole to dig out of.
I get that, and I'm gonna go back to what Director Scott was saying. When I necessarily mean the goalposts, if I'm gonna say two things. One is if we didn't hit the goals, then we need to change the goals and do something else. This is just as I'm thinking about this. Two, when we talk about the performance measures, it's not going to matter where we fall at in September when we get the SBAC is. It's 3%. So it doesn't matter if we fall at 17, 20, 23. It's a 3% growth in proficiency that we're looking for. So I think if we stick with that as far as the alignment piece, it's not going to matter where we fall at because it's already set at 3%. So if we continue with that line of thinking, and we're not saying in the board goals we can't add, using MAP growth as well, but I think we already have a measure that we already want, that we've already, that we have set up in this contract.
So
it's not going to matter where those. It's not going to matter where those numbers fall at. It's 3%. So if it fall, I'm going to repeat myself again. If it's at 15%, we're looking at 18. If it's at 20%, it's looking at 23. So I think we have a base of where we want to get to. Now, wherever those numbers is, that's where you start from. So I don't think we have to get additional information because we already know what the growth we want to see.
And I guess what I would say, and we had this conversation a while back, is if the proposal that I think I hear from you is let's adopt those proficiency goals as board goals, then I think we need to have that conversation again that we had a couple of years ago about growth versus proficiency. Both of those are very important, right? We need to be measuring proficiency for sure. I am very concerned if our board goals and the contract goals are only around proficiency, it sets up a really negative incentive to bring kids that are close to the line across the line and discounts all that hard work, the hardest work of the district, which is bringing the kids at the very bottom up. They're not going to get to proficiency in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but that to me is the most important part of this work, and I'm worried that proficiency goal doesn't measure that at all. And
I agree. You know, so when we talk about, and I think this is go with the and, right? If we have our board goals, we already know one measurement tool we want to use is that the 3% piece. We can add growth as well. We don't have to be stuck with just one. We can use both.
I think we're in agreement.
Do we have the proficiency data? I mean, I think we haven't done the not SBAC. What is it?
OSAS.
OSAS. Okay, the OSASI. We haven't done that yet. So what if we're going to talk about changing our board goals to proficiency? Like, what is our baseline data? Do we have that?
We wouldn't have baseline data. We would simply have to write goals that say the percentage of, X student group will increase by X percentage point over.
How would we know?
We would not have a baseline.
I mean,
so we would
be
picking a number out of the air.
3% over what?
The baseline comes in September. It's not out of the air. The baseline will come in September.
Okay, yes.
So then we wouldn't
would
have
provide
new
the
board
baseline.
goals. So the baseline would be set in September. Then we wouldn't have new board goals until September of the following year?
No, we can do the board goals for 2023. Well, these years 2023, 2024.
The baseline would be set in September.
That baseline,
whatever that
is
number
in the
is,
fall,
that becomes the
gonna be-
baseline, and then he has the 3%. So let's be clear. Like what I want to make sure that we're all clear on. 1 second here, because I know he's biting at the hip. Is when I said choice, like when we were talking about choice, myself, Gary, and what we were talking about was whether you choose SBAC or MAPS. That's up to you. I don't really care. Whatever you choose is what you choose. If you choose proficiency or growth, I don't care. Whatever you choose, you choose. Because what we didn't want was for him to be able to come back and say, well, if it were up to me, I would have chose this. Or if it was up to me, I would have chose that. So what we said was, if you want proficiency, choose proficiency. If you want to choose growth, choose growth. If you want to choose the percentage, the increase, what is that? And then when we came up with the number 3, when we sat down, what was said was, if I can't meet 3%, then I don't deserve to be here. So if we can do 3%, if we have a baseline from which we can start from. Now, I don't make these words up. I don't just pull words out of the air. And so this is what was said. The reason that I brought this up is because of what I felt was a misalignment. And like, I'm the type of guy that when I go, if I need tires for my car, I rotate them all at the same time. So every 6 months, the tires get rotated. And then after that, they get replaced. I don't go if one tire gets low and then go replace one tire. I literally feel like my car is wobbling. So like if I try to go fast, I feel like the car is wobbling. If I try to stop, I feel like the brakes are shaking. So when I replace my tires, I replace them all because I don't want there to be a misalignment issue. I need to be able to roll smoothly, and I need to know that all of my tires are doing the exact same thing at the exact same time and that they're working like they're supposed to. I take my car in consistently to get it looked at so that I can make sure that I don't have a misalignment. I promise y'all I'm going somewhere, but this is what preachers do. I need to make it make sense to you.
We're supposed to do that every 6 months.
It's all about alignment.
It's about alignment. And so if his contract says one thing and our goals say another thing, he's wobbling. And so we need to figure out how to bring this thing to an alignment, because I don't want him, when he starts speeding up, the problem isn't when you're going slow that you notice that there's a problem with your tires. The problem is when you actually try to speed up or you try to stop too fast. So when you try to speed up, you get past 65, the car starts shaking because the tires they're not balanced properly, or they're not at the right, the right levels. Or when you try to brake, the car starts braking, running fast because the wheels are messed up. The problem with the soup is going to be As he starts saying, okay, look, this is what's coming down the pipe, and if crap is rolling downhill for me, then guess what? That means it's going to roll downhill for you. So now all of my administrators, y'all got to get on the same page, because if they going to hold me to this, then you best believe that I'm going to hold you to this. And so as he's starting to speed stuff up, if there's a misalignment somewhere, then we're going to be shaking all over the place. You start messing up the undercarriage of the car. You start having all these other problems because you didn't take care of something as simple as making sure that all the tires were aligned. I'm trying to get us aligned so that he can speed up or slow down, whatever it is he needs to be able to do. He needs to be able to do it without the shaking, without the vibration, because every time you shake, you tearing up something else. So the choice was his.
Director Green,
in that regard.
Director Hollins has given us a suggestion. Can we move towards it? Because I hear you, and I think we're all in agreement.
I think
let's get on the same
Jess
page.
has something to say, and I have a question procedurally.
Can I just get this on the table? Because I think we can short circuit this conversation. Director Hollins said pretty clearly what we need is to put both on the table. We have growth targets here, and I think we need to agree as a board, do we stick with the 60%? And then we have the proficiency targets in the contract, which is 3% from the baseline we'll know in September. And if both of those become the board goals, we are now in alignment. We have both of those on there. It's an AMBO situation. And if the board agrees, we can move forward with those as board goals.
And with the conversation.
That works. I like that idea.
Well, it was your idea.
So I'm glad you like it.
And just to kind of go back to, and it's not like we're just going to be looking at those board goals, for, in the fall, and then it's just that year. He has, the district has this whole year to implement the math curriculum, to implement what everything they're going to implement this whole year. So it's not just, we're going to look at it, in August. No, the things that they're saying that they're going to put in place, they're doing that now. They're doing that for this year. So we have this year and 2023, 2024. And so that's just my little piece. But I love the idea Ed you just put out there, and Director Scott put out there, and I agree with that.
That's great. So we'll have 3 data points. We'll be able to draw a line in September with. We'll have MAPS data that we have currently, but is that a completely different?
What I would offer is to think of them as 2 different data points, because they are 2 different things. Okay. And know that they're both important, right? Proficiency can be here, and what we're doing with growth is saying, look, Renard grew from here to here. He's not yet proficient, but he's making progress, and that's good, and we want to celebrate that, because if we don't look at growth, then all the students who grow but don't reach proficiency count as sort of not making proficiency, and that doesn't allow us to celebrate the hard work that happens in schools every day.
Thank you. Yes, Student Representative Weinberg, and then Director Constian.
Thank you. It's always hard to get a word in edgewise. Anyways, I love the sentiment of alignment. I also just want to remind the board that the decision on the contract was made in closed session by U7, not the broader community, or with engagement with students or staff. So when we're adopting board goals, I believe it's our community goals and values that should be instilled into this. So before we adopt these board goals, we didn't even talk about revising these board goals before I looked at this presentation, I guess. So I would like to take a pause for a sec, and instead of just saying we're going to run with alignment, I'd like to have a longer conversation about what that means.
Thank you.
So I do have a question procedurally, but I'm squirming over here because, we do have some governance questions to resolve, but we haven't been talking about our students. We haven't even addressed our students and their challenges or their successes at all. And this is the first time we have heard from staff about the results of our MAPS testing. So I have a lot of questions that I'd like to pose to Dr. Proctor and Dr. Omabain about strategies in our schools. And, I've had the opportunity to be in some of our schools since they received their MAPS data, and to be able to see up close like what that looks like. Okay, who are our students that we really need to focus on? What are our strategies that appear to be working? What are our strategies that aren't giving us the traction that we need? So I want to ask those questions because that's what I care about. I don't want to derail this adult-centered governance conversation if we really do have open questions that everyone feels like we need to resolve tonight. But this is not the conversation that I want to be having about that MAPS data. I want to be talking about what are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not quite working? Who are our schools that are getting it right? How are we sharing their best practices with our schools that are still struggling? That's the stuff I want to hear about, not just because that's the student-centered conversation I care about, because that's the stuff that we need to know going into the budget process. You know, what do we need to prioritize? What do we need to resource? So happy to let this all resolve before we go there, but that's the conversation I want to have.
Thank you, and I agree 100% with what you just said about governance. My questions about your presentation were simply to get an understanding of when we might get a little bit additional information once you infer why we landed where we were. If we get a presentation at some point about again what success looks like and where is it happening and where isn't it happening, and if you could give some guesses as to why some of the large disparities in the data we saw. It would just be a question of timing when we might get that.
Sure. We were earlier today, Dr. Proctor, Dr. Omabane, and Ms. Calvin and I were just having this very conversation with the ASDs. We were looking at map data and going through an inquiry process and really thinking about whether or not or to what extent the data that they see confirm or refute what they see in their schools and working with principals. So I think that would be a presentation and a conversation we can have around what's working and what's not working. As I mentioned in the presentation, we're also trying to do some reimagining and refreshing of the school improvement process. And a part of that will be sort of quarterly reviews and discussions where principals have conversations with their ASDs as well as with other principals in their cluster about what's working and what's not working, because we know colleague to colleague is where we probably do our very best thinking and our very best problem solving. So those are things that I can preview for you, but I can't give you exactly when we might be able to have that conversation with you, because these are all things that we're sort of gearing up on the runway to take the runway and take off on.
Yeah, I guess the middle school data, like that dip that we were seeing, I was really curious about that, because I've heard as a parent, it's like, oh, you know, the kids are concerned about other things in middle school than sitting and, you know, learning. And I just wondered if that was in middle schools, you know, or K-8s, if we're seeing that across, and what we might infer about that data.
It certainly isn't unusual to see a dip in middle school. Those are very awkward years for our students, as we all remember. Some of the hardest years
memories
of your educational career happen in grades 6, 7, and 8. And so it's not unusual to see a little dip between 5th grade and 6th grade and then 7th grade. So I don't think that's out of step with what we would expect. I think what Dr. Proctor and I want to get underneath of with the assistance of the regional SUPs and the ASDs is really in English language arts what's going on, right? Because there was a trailing off, almost like a lizard's tail, that got thinner and thinner as we went up into the upper grades. And so that will require some further investigation and discussion and conversation.
Thank you.
I just want to state the obvious, though, which this is a real-time conversation, because we will do MAPS testing again in the spring. And so we have another opportunity, correct?
We will only, we don't want to double test students.
Oh, we're just doing fall and winter. Okay.
So we just do fall and winter.
Okay.
No.
But we have of course not. So we won't do the MAPS, but we'll have the OSAS, which is essentially the same, but we still have the opportunity to, you know, address the areas where we need to see more accelerated growth, which is essentially everywhere.
Yes.
So this is a real-time concern. So that's what we want to dig into with what those strategies are. Sorry.
And I just wanted to add, as we look into the budget conversations, I'd love to see like how we're prioritizing strategies that are working, strategies that aren't, and how we can be nimble in reallocation of funds in the school year as we are implementing pilot programs as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative. And then Director Britton Edwards.
Yeah. Thank you. To the presentation. So one of the things I thought was promising was like the start of the hockey stick, which was the flat and then the starting to move up. So hopefully that trend continues, but this is just more of a sort of the framework of to consider the recommendation that was made on the adjusting the goals, that for a different reason, I was interested in also seeing I guess I'm not quite ready yet because I am interested in seeing what that proficiency data is, not so much necessarily aligning with the contract, but just in my own mind to be able to see like what that means if I were to agree that that's with that recommendation. But some questions I had just when looking at these data, and I don't know if we're going to get this presentation some other time or what, but we had 3rd and 5th grade, but nothing on the 8th. We had data on the 8th grade, but no summary and recommendations, and so I'm curious about that. That's a proficiency goal versus a growth goal. So I was wondering, is that the reason why?
It was because we don't have proficiency data, so there's nothing for me and the team to look at, and therefore made no recommendation on that at this time.
Okay, so I'm thinking just as a parent and a non-educator, what is most informative to our parent community for presentations, in the sense of when I look at the growth, I really have to think hard and remember everything I've been taught about growth. And I think we need to be able to put it in the context of how it's understandable to parents. And it is connecting it to proficiency, and we don't want to do what Director Scott said, which is get so focused on the proficiency that we're not rewarding and accelerating the growth, because that is what's going to get students to proficiency. So I'm just looking for like the larger picture on how we share with parents like how we're on the right track, because if we're making investments in the budget and we're saying these are to get us on the right track, and you need to ask a parent, like they're like, my kid's not at grade level, which is their definition of proficiency. And I said, well, look at all this great growth. But if we haven't put it in context, so these slides are super informative. How do we share with our community how that you get to that growth? And I say, to me, having the 8th grade piece added, but being careful to explain, so bring the community along with where we are on proficiency and growth, but then also put in the high school pieces, because I know last year that is a place where actually we hit some of the goals, I think on the CTE ones. So we have some data on like CTE courses that students have taken, so really start getting these trend charts, because I do think that it hopefully we'll start telling a story and educating our broader community and board members on this sort of correlation between growth and proficiency, and that we have some great stories and successes, and we have some other places where we need to be supportive of all of our school staff, the central office educators, in how do we change that trajectory. So I'm trying to think about how I make sense of this storytelling, and then also, like I say, and answering the question of like, do I support the recommendations? Because I just don't know enough to be able to make the case like this is and it's not a lack of trust, but it's more I need to be able to explain to somebody else. So I'm wondering what that looks like.
Okay, that was a lot in there, Director Rivers. I think it really looks like probably graphical representations that are a little bit different than this, that can really look at a student's trajectory over time. And we need multiple data points in order to do that. We now have 2 on most of our students, and I believe that once we have the fall data, we'll be able to sort of connect those 3 dots and sort of show how growth leads to proficiency. And that's why it's so very important that we keep our eye on whether all students or most students are growing or not, whether or not they reach proficiency, because we know if they're not growing, they're never going to reach proficiency over time. So I think that's what it might look like. And I am certainly excited to work on something that might better communicate that, working with Chief of Staff Garcia and Lieutenant Colonel Freddie Mac around how we communicate that out to the broader stakeholder audience that we are responsible for.
Yeah, it's kind of the 3D model versus a like one-dimensional, because I do think, I say parents, they really understand, like, is my child at grade level?
Mm-hmm.
And so how we tell that story and holding tight to the growth, what growth means at the same time, I think is really pay a lot of dividends. And like I say, then just get the whole, K-12 would be helpful to me to be able to answer the question is like, do I support the recommendation?
And just on that communication thread, I think it would be great to know that we have a way to communicate with our school communities about the overall performance within their school. Like, there's a lot of work left to be done, but there's also some amazing success stories, especially in some of our highest need, highest poverty schools. And those communities deserve to hear about that, and creates momentum. And then where there's work to be done, those families deserve to hear, there's work to be done everywhere, but where we don't see that kind of success, those families deserve to hear about, this is how we're pivoting. This is our, this is how we're changing course in this way, or these are the additional resources that are coming into the building. So I hope we can have some communication. It's always helpful, but I think coming out of the pandemic, where people are aware so acutely of how much their students have lost, I think it's really important.
Thank you for that. I think you're speaking our language of school improvement, because part of what we want to do is bring the school improvement plans into greater alignment. That means principals will be using, at the K level, might be using their MAP data as part of their literacy and mathematics goals. Those school improvement plans are to be communicated with the school team based on the instructional leadership teamwork and with the community. So I think as we refine the process, we can build in those communication checkpoints that are already part of rich school improvement practices that we want to embody here in PPS.
Director Brim-Edwards, were you finished with your comments?
Yeah, I had one other question. Maybe this is for the superintendent, and so you can just wrap in. Okay. So part of when you said that if they're below 50% in growth, that they're actually falling further behind. So I was going through the presentation and circling where we're below 50, and I'm interested from the superintendent, do you think that's a trailing impact from the pandemic, or is it, those are the growth rates that we had, and that's what we need to disrupt, or is it this was a one-time, and we're going to accelerate everybody and what those strategies are? Because I look at that, I was feeling pretty good about it, and then until you said like under 50%, it's like, oh, we've got a fair number of those in there. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure, I'll get to that question, and I've been trying to listen really attentively because many of the questions are the right wonderings. Thanks, Dr. Adams. And I don't want to get lost, the lead here. Despite the last 2 years, you heard third graders have made 8%. More of them are meeting growth targets, and double that, 15% almost, in mathematics. And you heard a couple initial sort of our own wonderings about what we might attribute that to. Well, having curriculum helps. But I want to make sure and acknowledge the hard work of our students and our educators and all the support staff. Despite all the challenges that we've been facing, we're not talking to you about negative numbers. We're not talking to you about a few percentage points. We're seeing that the general student population. Now, of course, it can't help but be noticed that there's a lot of variability across the grade levels, across student racial groups, and these are precisely the kinds of questions that this snapshot is intended to provoke at the school level, at the grade level team, at the instructional level team, for us centrally, these very same questions. Where do we see anomalies where student groups are performing at a greater rate than perhaps another school? There's a practice going on there. Let's check it out. Let's connect our educators. Let's create space for teachers to collaborate and ask those questions. We're presenting tonight because I heard our board say we want to get into a cycle of continuous improvement. We want to progress monitor. We want to gain our own data literacy. These are the kinds of conversations we initially have with schools who haven't had the benefit of being able to dashboard or have a comprehensive set of assessment data. This is the first time we actually have 2 points to draw a line between. And so what you're seeing is just 6 months of growth, and we saw 8 and 15%. So I know that's 2 percentage points below the 60% we were hoping for, but a few things have happened over the last 2 years. And we know that there's a few ingredients that go into school improvement, into supporting student learning, and that means placing, the emphasis on an instructional framework and all of the other SEL supports that our students need, and all those conditions, all the things that you've been hearing testimony about. And this is data literacy that we want our families and our students themselves to have an understanding of. So this is exactly why you'll be hearing more about our desire to create those opportunities, whether it's through a parent or family university. So we have data literacy nights. So they have an opportunity after every one of these administrations to see their students' individual reports and have an understanding of where they're getting stronger, where we need to apply more attention and growth. And the same thing goes with new curriculum we're adopting. And at the same time that our teachers are making meaning of that curriculum, we also want our parents to have an understanding of why they're seeing the kinds of assignments that they're seeing, or the kind of work that they're being exposed to, and how that's intended to help them along the skill areas that we want to see growth in. So all to say, we committed to you that we would come back every single time we have some kind of a measure that gives you a sense of the pulse across the district. Tonight, it's the map. Another time it'll be our successful school survey. Another time it'll be something else. All of these are intended to sort of give us a decent sort of understanding of where we are, where the capacity is growing in the organization, and hopefully we can begin to strengthen our own set of coherent strategies that will require resources, whether that's dedicated funding, whether it's time and energy of our staff, whether it's the way we spend our energy and our conversations, if we're going to meet those achievement outcome goals that we have for all of our students, but in particular, those that have not always been well served. We know in any district, I've never not observed these fluctuations across grade levels and content areas. And the more sophisticated you are in your apparatus and ability to investigate that, and you can bring back up the conversations that we're learning and gleaning from at the school level, we start to get a much more precise understanding of where the supports need to be applied. And that's the money ball of public education reform, my unfinished dissertation. Thank you, Dr. Adams. I appreciate your questions. We'll keep those in mind each time that we come back to you, and hopefully in our proposed actions for the coming school year, you'll start to hear elements of what we believe is going to start to not just continue this trend, but really accelerate based on best practices, the kinds of outcomes that we want to see. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I want to just echo what Student Representative Weinberg said about, and also Director Constam, about getting these questions answered, that hopefully our budget would be able to respond to the data we're seeing, or the points of theories of action, and how we can make a difference for students. And with that, I'm going to move us along so we can we're not too far off track, but
I just would want to put in a plug, though, for some opportunity in the near future to actually talk about strategies. And I know we'll address it in the course of the budget work, but we have seen some promising practices, and we have seen some great results in some places. So what are they? How do we double down on them? So
thank you. Bookmark. Okay, we're going to move on to the 2020.
I have one question. Sorry.
I apologize, Director Hollins.
Hi, I just have one question. So, did we come to some conclusion? What's like the next step? But I just feel like it's just like a to be continued type of deal. I just want to know where we're at.
Yeah, I'll just throw this out for board consideration. Yeah, I think it is a to be continued, and I think that was the intent, right? We're hearing the data tonight. beginning to think about it. I think to Student Representative Weinberg's point, and others, we're starting that conversation about revising the board goals. I will say I think maybe the appropriate time to do that is as we adopt the superintendent's evaluation over the next few weeks, and there's not a set time for doing that, but again, we talked about doing that once we receive this map data, setting the evaluation for, again, the rest of the school year and next school year. That would be an appropriate time for the board to finalize its thinking on what those board goals are, because obviously what those board goals are should be what we see in that evaluation template. But again, that's just me speaking as one member, so I know we need to move on.
I think that's correct.
I agree with that. At least we have some kind of like the next step. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. So moving us along to the next topic, the 2022-23 draft school calendar. Again, Superintendent Guerrero, would you please introduce this item?
Sure, just via intro here. I know we have Dr. Proctor and Daniel Kogan. I see you back there, so you might want to sit in the front row here or come up because he plays a really key role here. We're here to talk about the 22-23 school year calendar. Obviously, it's an item of a lot of interest from students, families, and everyone. And each year, I think you've seen us present some features that come with that calendar that we've tried to integrate, that we've tried to be sensitive to, that we've tried to build in. Tonight you heard examples of where we can continue to fine-tune it, and that was great to hear. So I think we'll ask Dr. Proctor. You're not voting, you're not taking action on this tonight, but we did want to, as we have every year prior, walk you through what are some of the key features that we're looking to integrate. And so we'll have Dr. Proctor highlight some of those, and if you have more detailed questions, staff's available as well.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Chair DePass and board directors, Superintendent Guerrero, Student Representative Weinberg. Hey, Liz. Okay, so so with that, thank you for the opportunity to present the proposed 22-23 district calendar for your consideration. Some key things, as you would note, shared with you previously. There are 3 professional development days, non-school days, we have added to the calendar to support professional learning for our professional educators. These 3 professional development days on September 23rd, October 14th, and February 17th are additional days added to the calendar and do not reduce the existing instructional days. Professional educators from schools identified for improvement, which are a comprehensive school improvement and targeted school improvement schools, are required to attend. Professional educators from other schools and classified staff are also strongly encouraged to attend. Professional learning is critical to the successful implementation of the newly adopted curriculum, including our 612 component of our math adoption. As you know, we've adopted K-5 this year, and our K-12 adoption for language arts. We wanted to avoid conflict with major religious and cultural holidays to the extent possible in the design of this calendar, and we also want to plan to engage stakeholders on recognizing religious holidays for the 23-24 calendar. We have a list of religious and cultural holidays that we shared with building leaders to avoid scheduling extracurricular activities on these holidays. After hearing from student presentations about religious holidays, we may institute more rigorous guidance to avoid conflicts with these days until we are able to convene a process where we formally look at the possibility of including the religious holidays for the 23-24 calendar. At the next board meeting on April 19th, you will vote to adopt the calendar for the 22-23 school year. That's the base information and the base shifts, as always, in looking at and planning forward for the calendar. It includes many features and considerations that were factored into the school calendar over the past few years. Some of them include attempt to create a more student-focused, family-friendly school calendar, attempt to preserve or maximize uninterrupted whole weeks for instruction, an effort to keep teacher planning days on Mondays or Fridays to avoid student breaks in the middle of the week, maintain the start of the school year on a day prior to Labor Day, and a whole host of considerations that have been consistent with prior year calendar developments. So at this point, I am done just kind of giving the overview. More detailed information was provided to the board prior to this meeting.
There were some questions from community members about just the explanation of the professional development days being required for some teachers for the new curriculum and not for others. Can you just speak to briefly the difference?
The professional development the professional development for curriculum will be required and offered for all teachers. What we are doing is we're giving a head start to some of our most critical schools and getting an opportunity to be trained on the new curriculum ahead of the start of the school year, as these schools, have demonstrated, the need. And with that, we do plan on offering side-by-side coaching and support for our teachers in that effort.
So is that a longer runway? It's a longer runway then for the schools that need more support?
They will get the training earlier prior to the school starting so that they could start planning, and they'll have coaching and support in their planning efforts prior to the first day of school.
And on that same point, can you just talk about how that aligns with the provisions in the current contract around professional development days? Because I think we've always been down to the wire before, but we have the ability to add.
Yeah, so we took advantage of a provision within a contract that allowed us to add professional development days for our most critical schools, which are state-identified CSI and TSI schools. And the provision allows for us to add 3 additional days.
So I had a question about the possibility. I was really glad that in the staff report and then in your presentation you talked about recognition of other holidays and culturally important days. And I am curious whether there is just a recognition this year, not that it changes actually the school calendar, but that we recognize, and I don't think this requires a change in any of the contract terms, but that we recognize that while it may be still a school day, that there won't be like afternoon or evening activities or outdoor schools scheduled on significant holidays. And having been on, this has been such a long-standing issue in Portland that, well, I think would say in all of Oregon, that we haven't recognized that, and so every year there's a case where community members actually have to advocate for themselves. Like, my student can't go to outdoor school this week because it happens to fall on a significant day for our family and for our culture. And so I'm wondering if it's possible, because I think what's happened in the past when we've raised it, it's like next year we're going to put them on the calendar so we don't have this, and then inevitably somebody schedules school play or a variety of other activities. So I'm wondering if there's a way to mark things on the calendar so when school staff look at the calendar, they realize, like, these are weeks that we shouldn't be scheduling things, or, to Jackson's point, high stakes tests for students. And that seems like an interim step between having that larger conversation and longer.
Yeah. So I did state that to avoid conflicts for those major holidays and cultural significant holidays, that we put out to all of our school leaders and our schools and staff to avoid scheduling any extracurricular activities or events on those particular days. And specifically, what we'll do this year is institute more rigorous guidance to schools, school staff, principals, when we look at our athletic calendar and such, to avoid the conflict for those dates. So we have and will continue to put out very rigorous communication around avoiding anything on those dates.
I guess I'm wondering whether to put it on the actual the adopted school calendar. I think we have in the past, there have been communications that have, in the last, that I know of, in the last 20 years, we've communicated that, but because it's on a different piece of paper and that it's not like one place, so the PTA may
So we
plan
could
their
take a look
meetings,
at that for sure, yeah.
Yeah, so
possible.
Combining it so we have one place. The other question I had is currently on the calendar it says it has like a planning day, when it's my understanding those are really end of the quarter grading days, and I'm wondering about our nomenclature. It's just a question about our nomenclature of calling them planning days versus grading days. You don't have to answer now. I can find out next week, or because we're not voting on it tonight. But I'm curious about that because it implies that we're planning versus. It's my understanding those are actually grading days.
Well, part of teacher planning includes a variety of activities, and teacher planning includes planning for lessons, looking at student data, looking at assessment results, grading. So there's a number of activities that happen during teacher planning time.
I appreciate that because I'm not an educator, and I feel like I should know that, but it's a range of, it sounds like it's a range of activities. It's not just literally grading on that one day.
Absolutely. It's a range of activities.
I had a question about, you said 3 additional days at the start of the school year prior to the 3 normal days for professional development and like school readiness for teachers, that TSI and CSI schools will have 3 additional, so 6 total days of expected professional development before the start of the school year. Is that correct?
No, it's 3 days prior to the start of school. It's
For
3
all
additional
teachers.
days. Yeah.
3 additional days to the 3 that all teachers already have.
We are taking we are taking, is it 3 or is it 2? We worked off of the provision in the contract where the teachers were able to add the 3 days for specific schools. So what we are planning is for 3 days of professional learning.
Okay, just to clarify, you said that teachers get to choose to add 3 professional development days.
No, it's in the contract that
Okay.
we as a district can add 3 additional days of PD for our state-identified schools as CSI and TSI.
Okay.
School categories.
So those 3 days fall when?
Before the teacher contractual days.
Okay, so there is 6 days then. So
There
it's the
are
3
a
for
total,
TSI
no,
schools.
if you look at the calendar,
Okay.
we're looking at the calendar and we are seeing not 6, there are 4 planning days that we're looking at August 24th, August 25th, August 26th, and August 29th are identified as planning days.
For all teachers?
No, no, not for.
Okay.
You're saying 6 in the beginning.
Okay.
And I'm saying that there are not 6.
Okay.
There are 4 in August.
Yes.
There's one proposed in September, one proposed in October, one proposed in November. It's small, it's hard to see. One proposed in January, it's one in February. April, thank you.
No
Your
one's
eyes are a
familiar.
little bit
No one's
younger.
familiar with
It's-
this draft calendar like Daniel.
So good evening, board directors. I'm Daniel Kogan, Academic Programs Associate, supporting Dr. Proctor. So just to clarify a couple points. One is, Director Brim Edwards, you may remember a couple years ago, we actually simplified the calendar. And one of the reasons to simplify the calendar was to support multilingual families, make it easier for translation, because the previous calendar had a lot of different symbols that were hard to follow. So I think, yes, we can definitely look at adding additional markers to identify things like religious holidays, but then it starts to get complicated potentially for families. So I think that's something we can look at. But I think for families, it was, how do we know when school's happening, when it's not happening, kind of keep it simple. Then we have additional calendars. We have Google Calendars for our building administrators to help them know many other things, such as religious and cultural holidays, such as many other things that they need to know about that are happening, such as Heritage Months, for instance. And so just to answer your question, Jackson, is that the 3 additional days that are for the TSI and CSI schools, those are the ones that are happening during the school year that are scheduled. So that's September 23, October 14, and February 17.
17th.
Those are the 3 additional days. The 4 days that have that symbol can be, that symbol is for planning or professional development days. So that's where I think the confusion, some of the confusion is coming in. And 2.5 of those days are designated for professional learning, and 1.5 are for planning per our contract with our teachers. So I think, Dr. Proctor, you were alluding to that we would have some of that time dedicated to district level professional learning, and some of that time will be school level professional learning. So that I hope that clarifies your question.
Did that answer your question?
And that those 4 days prior to the start of the school year are at all schools.
So non-TSI and CSI schools, those teachers will not be expected to report on those 3 days.
The 3 days that
The 3 days of professional development in the September, April.
Right, so contractually, we can only require the TSI and CSI teachers to attend, and as Dr. Proctor said, we're strongly encouraging all teachers, and including our classified staff, to also participate, and all that participate will be compensated.
Okay, thank you very much. That was helpful. We're not doing anything, this is a first socialization to the calendar, and if we have additional questions, where should they be directed?
You could direct them.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, thank you, Director Hollins.
So I just want to first thank Dr. Proctor for recognizing the kids that spoke earlier. So that's a great way to stay children-centered. And I know this is about this calendar for this year, but just throw this out here. Have we looked at doing a balanced calendar? So as we talk about professional development and we talk about kids losing learning during breaks and stuff like that, have we looked at doing a balanced calendar at some point?
How do you define a balanced calendar?
Year-round school. Something that kind of aligns with the most working people's work calendar.
Well, we could always, take a look at research and impact and effectiveness of it, but it is not, to answer your question, it is not something that we have considered going to a year-round school calendar.
Nor is it something we have the ability to consider given our current contract constraints.
And a number of factors as well, because that means we would have to budget very differently as well. So based on a number of those factors, it's just not something that we have considered.
So I'm going to go. Director Hollins, did you have another question, or you? Okay, I'll jump in.
We've historically had a couple schools. We had Rosa Parks most recently, and when I was in high school, we had a full year-round. That was a long time ago, and it's a good question. But I'm gonna move us on, unless you have another.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask two things around the religious holidays. There's some things that we don't control, and I'm wondering if we can have a conversation with MESD because they control the outdoor school schedule, and also OSAA. So while we can say on the calendar there's can't be anything, OSAA can organize things outside of our district that again our students can't participate in. So I would hope that we could start that conversation with them, or at least it sounds like Eugene has done some work around this, so there may be a concentration of districts that.
That's an example of an activity, and we have had to work each spring with trying to create some flexibility so that we're respecting that. But again, these are entities that operate outside the school district, so hopefully everybody's starting to integrate the same sensitivities on the calendar, but we'll work with school communities and MSD for sure.
Great, thank you.
It's so frustrating not to be able to control everything.
I had one question.
Yes. I'm
I
gonna
had one more question, sorry.
Okay.
I've just heard that, or I've been told that there's a grievance been filed for this calendar. Is there a reason why a grievance would be filed for this calendar according to the PAT contract?
Sure, because the PAT is able to file grievances. I think with the grievance that there is a concern about some staff being asked to attend professional learning, and we are working through the procedure of following guidelines in addressing grievances.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move us along now to talk about the board election zone redistricting. And Vice Chair Scott, would you like to introduce this next item?
Yes, thank you, Chair DePass. I'll try and be quick. It's a somewhat administrative but not unimportant issue. So this item we're considering right now is about boundaries of the electoral zones that board members must reside within in order to run for PPS school board. For anyone following along at home, it is not about school boundaries. That's another conversation. So just want to be very clear about that. I know. I took the easy one. Following each decennial U.S. Census, all local governments are required to apply the new demographic data to their existing electoral boundaries, attempting to ensure that there is no more than a 10% deviation in population between the largest and smallest districts. Oregon law requires that if a school district is zoned, it shall divide the district into the necessary number of zones as nearly equal in population as shown by the latest federal census, as practicable, taking into account attendance areas where possible. What that means is we have 7 zones for PPS. Between the last census and this one, over that 10-year time, people have moved. And so now, at this point, some of the population in some of those zones deviates by more than 10% to population in other zones, and so we're required by law to address that. So we did ask PSU's Population Research Center to craft some scenarios. We received 2 of those scenarios from PSU, and then the Board Elections Task Force, which is me, Director Hollins, and Director Brim-Edwards, met and discussed the issue during our February 7th meeting, and again on February 28th and March 14th. And we also shared some of the initial proposals at the February 22nd board meeting. The task force has ended up recommending option A2, as that option will result in nearly equal school board zones and attempts to minimize the changes to the existing school zone boundaries. I do want to just note that during this process, there have been a number of questions raised about other potential reforms, including changing how board members are elected, changing the way campaigns are financed, changing who is eligible to vote in PPS elections. I believe, and I think the task force agreed, that these are important issues that will require engagement with our school communities, other stakeholders, and I do hope there's board interest in continuing these conversations moving forward. But any changes along those lines will take a considerable amount of time, and in many cases, actually, will take some action at the state legislature. So our proposal tonight is just to make the necessary changes that bring us into compliance. With that, I will turn it back to Chair DePass.
Excellent. Thank you, Vice Chair Scott. Do I have a motion, a second?
Motion.
To adopt resolution?
Second.
What's the resolution number, Director
The
Green?
resolution number is Resolution 6475.
On it.
Exactly. So Director Green moves and Director, is there a second?
Yes, I think it was.
Holland's seconds the adoption of Resolution 6475. Is there any board discussion?
Yes, I'm not going to be able to support this tonight because I spent a year recruiting this fabulous woman of color to run for my seat. And she just started her campaign stuff, and she lives in Creston, Kenilworth, which is now going to be in zone 6 instead of zone 7. And I had shared that with Director Scott, and of course, it can't just be about one person and making it for one candidate. And I know I'm being super petty, but I worked really hard to try to find someone. So I'm not running. So if you know anyone out there who would like to run in the new zone 7, please let me know. But and hopefully she'll be able to run if Director Brim Edwards decides not to run in zone 6 in 2025. It's a super bummer because she's super excited and I think she'd be amazing on the board, and we could really use her perspective. So hopefully she'll be here eventually.
Well, I recruited somebody who was across the street from the address that she needed to be. So I understand. Did you have comments, Director Brim Edwards? Yeah, no, that's okay. That was it. I was sharing with Director Lowry that I was very, very excited for somebody, and I realized she was in my zone. I mean, maybe for next time. I'm very excited for her, and maybe next time. So.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to applaud Director Scott because I think he's the probably only person who's led a redistricting process who I know that does not have a court challenge. And I think part of not yet.
Don't jinx him.
And actually, until the comments that Director Lowry made, there really wasn't a lot of political discussion. It was more about looking at the racial demographics of the district, and I think there's some really interesting of each of the zones. There's some really interesting information, I think, that's been posted. There's also economic information. And it really was a process about our school communities and, asking, I think, all the right questions to set us up for some other discussions. But I think often when we talk about redistricting, it's there's, the politicians are doing something to protect their own or putting politics into consideration. And I found the process to be very absent of that and much more looking at how do we best represent and keep communities of interest together. And I think you did a really nice job with that.
I just want to be clear. I think this is an excellent map, and it's the right answer. I'm just annoyed.
And I think that speaks to Director Scott's skill set really highly. You did, and yeah. So this is great. Is there any public comment on this issue?
There's not.
So the board will now vote on resolution 6475, board zone redistricting. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. All opposed, please.
No.
We have and student representative.
Yes.
So, and are there any abstentions? Resolution 6475 is approved by a vote of 6-1, with student representative Weinberg voting.
Yes.
I just want to echo Director Scott's comments about the other issues that we talked about around this. This is something that I've been interested in for a long time, whether or not board members should only run in the district in which they live, which really lowers the barriers to participation and makes it much easier to have more grassroots-based campaigns. So I'm still really interested in pursuing that, and I'm definitely interested in aligning with Multnomah County campaign finance reforms, which is something that we could just decide to do. So let's not let those things die, but I'm glad we checked this off our list.
And I think there's that conversation about having students vote that we need to take up with the Oregon legislature as well.
My understanding is that we can't implement our own finance contribution. That's something that has to happen at the state. I just want to make sure that it's not like we decided
just
not to
direct
do it.
people back. We did receive a memo from council about that issue, so.
Director Lowry, are you sure that's not just because Cleveland is now in my zone?
Well, that just increased the annoyance, but it was not the main factor. I've had a lot of lunches talking about running for office and yeah, but again, that means there's an opportunity for someone out there who might be super interested.
And people can move too. Sure. We're going to move along now to go through the first reading of revisions to the pest management policy, 3.30.82, and those are 4- and 6-legged pests. Formerly the environmental sustainable business practices, and we'll be talking about integrated pest management.
Yeah, there was a joke that instead of IPM didn't stand for integrated pest management, but integrated parent management.
That's apt.
So this is something that came out of the policy committee, recommended unanimously to bring it to the board for first reading. Essentially, when we passed the climate policy earlier this month, the many of the provisions in here actually are very similar to provisions now that are in the climate policy that relate to sustainable business practices. So we've eliminated those, and the remaining text in this policy all relates to integrated pest management and operating in an environmentally sensitive way and respectful of student and community health in terms of pesticides. So it's a pretty brief, straightforward, and so this will be posted at the board website, and the public comment period is a minimum of 21 days. Contact information for public comment will be posted with the policy, and the board will have the second reading of these policies on May 10th, absent some major change or amendment, but otherwise it would be the May 10th meeting. Do you want me to go to the second?
Yes, will you go to the second? The second first reading of the diploma policy?
Yes, it's the second first reading. So as board members may know, we had a first reading on the diploma policy at a board meeting earlier. And one of the questions that came up in the public comment period related to the state's action related to essential skills. The underlying changes that we originally made related to adding the partial credit for civics and half a credit, thank you, Chair DePass, and then removing English from the definition of language arts because words are important. And but what transpired since that first reading is the essential skills question came up because our policy referenced it, yet the state had suspended it. And then Director Green raised a really good question in committee, which also coincided with a conversation that's happening at the state level, and I'll see if I can summarize it correctly. But the question about essential skills, we've added that new language in here, so it's consistent, and we've staff consulted with the Department of Education, so our essential skills language in our policy now aligns with what's happening at the state. And then the issue that Director Green raised, and actually the way it's in section 1A2. And I think there's a layperson's language, because there was a lot of educator language around it, but the layperson language that Director Green raised is students who have a native language or heritage language other than English under our old policy were still required to take a world language. So you had, like the example you used, is the native Spanish speaker not only learning English, speaking Spanish, but then they were required to take French. And essentially what this new language, and this is going to be the non-technical, non-educator way of saying it, but the new language recognizes that asset that student's bringing, and that's not they have to then take another world language, because they already actually are, in some cases, ahead of our other students because they have 2 world languages. So that is what this revised policy draft, and it was a significant enough change from the last time we had a first reading, so it so we're having another first reading. It'll be posted on the website, open for comment for 21 days, and then move to a second reading or the adoption at the May 10th, assuming there's no other further changes. Did I get that correct, essentially? Okay. And I do thank Director Green for raising a great question in committee.
Next.
Okay, then the next thing we have is first readings of policy rescissions, and there is a memo in or a staff memo with the rescissions. The policy committee reviewed these and on 2 different dates and recommended these for rescissions. And I'll just run through them. There's one on the term of administrative contracts. It was adopted in 71 and amended in 95. It's covered in the revised statutes, not needed as a policy. We also have some public contracting and purchasing rules in policy 8.50.100. They're duplicative and not needed. Then we have 5.50.070 relating to expense reimbursement. It's, again, another policy that's not needed because the practice is outlined in other district materials. And then there's policy 6.30.020, which relates to special education students and the SIM, which is the Certificate of Initial Mastery Assessment Results. And the SIM was a state standard, and it's no longer part of the state standard, so we don't need it in our policy anymore. Policy 8.80.010, high performance facility design. This really is unnecessary now that we have the climate policy where we talk about building performance. And then policy 3.30.080, resource conservation. And again, that is another policy that we can rescind because we now have a climate policy that includes some of those items. So all of those rescissions were recommended by the committee, and they'll be posted on the board website for 21 days if people want to comment. The place to comment is also on the board website, and those would come back to the full board on May 10th. Let me keep going.
Next.
The last item that we have tonight, it's actually a second reading, and it's in your board packets, and it's the revised student conduct and discipline policy. And this was presented for a first reading on July 16th, 2019, and we opened it to public comment. There actually, I will say, was almost a year of engagement with community members, and this policy really was looking through the lens of the disproportionate discipline rates that we have we have in our schools, and looking into how to approach that. And so there was lengthy engagement with parents, with staff, with the different parent advisory groups, like the special ed parent advisory groups, with school communities, are really looking to bring in the parent voice and the student voice into the public comment period, into the policy, even before we put it out for the first reading. We did receive comments, and there has been lengthy discussions with the Portland Association of Teachers, and at the last meeting of the policy committee, we had an update about the policy, and we're going to be moving ahead with the recommending the adoption of this policy, and so having a second reading vote this evening. And I know that staff are here in case there's any questions about the policy, since it has been a period of time. But I do want, since I was involved in the committee discussions pretty intensely, that let people know that there was a lot of discussion. It wasn't just a staff, and it wasn't just a hurry up, let's put this on, and then went out for a first reading. There were lots of discussions, and it was really singularly focused on this issue of disproportionate discipline and how we can take a different approach to that. And I think we came up with a pretty good policy. So,
were the comments that were on the PAT version incorporated into the final? Some of them were just edits, but some of them were questions.
Ms. Large, do you want to speak to?
They were not incorporated.
Please. Oh, sorry.
There were those changes. That feedback was not incorporated into the policy. So what is presented for a second reading tonight is unchanged from what the first reading was.
Okay, and that was my question. Thanks.
Were the comments posted on the, were they shared with us at least? Or were the comments?
Well, when we received them, which was
in April of 2020.
2020. So we did get them, and then there were very significant discussions, including interest-based bargaining with representatives of the Portland Association of Teachers.
Okay. And then just the last thing, it's been a couple years since we've been virtual, but I'd like to start looking at the discipline data at the end of the year, because we do collect that data, disaggregate it by race, grade. So I'd love to start the practice of looking at that as we are back in person.
It's a great call out, because that really did inform our work, because if you look at the data, it's clear we need to do something different, because of disproportionality of not only students of color, but also special ed students and the intersectionality that's involved there. And I think it's a great call out.
It absolutely is, and we actually had public testimony tonight about that disproportionality at that intersection of special ed and race, and we could name it, and it's called the school to prison pipeline, and we absolutely need to see the data so we can address the disparities.
Would you like a motion?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm very tired. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 6476?
So moved.
You did that? While Herman was out of the room. That was...
Not only that, but she covered up it just to make sure I didn't try. But I love her, so we're good.
Did she shove you a little bit? Okay, so we have a motion by Director Lowry and a second by Director Scott to adopt Resolution 6476, that's the resolution to adopt the Student Conduct and Discipline Policy 4.30.010P. Director Lowry moves, Director Scott seconds the adoption. Is there any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
So the board will now vote on Resolution 6476, the resolution to adopt the student conduct and discipline policy. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain, just only because I just don't know enough about the policy when it was read a couple years ago and before I got on the board, so I'm going to just abstain on this one.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear your voice, so I was going to ask, and then Student Representative Weinberg voting.
Yes, and just to key in everyone, under implementation, it does says resources will be allocated, which is probably going to be financial. So as we look at budget, just to make sure that.
So there would be, that's noted that we would have there's a fiscal impact. Okay, we have one last item to take care of tonight, and that is to Resolution 6473 was pulled. And pardon me, I'll, let's see, scroll up to the top here. Resolution 6473, the settlement agreement, as proposed for consideration. Did you have a comment or? So you want to vote on it separately? Okay. Do I have a motion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion from Director Lowry and a second from Director Scott to adopt Resolution 6473, settlement agreement as proposed for consideration. All those in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. Yes. All those opposed, please say no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6473 is adopted by a vote of 6-1 with student representative voting.
I'm abstaining.
Abstaining. Okay, is there any other board business at this time for the good of the order? If not, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.